Any good acting has behavior with it.
Nate, why? Why such bitterness? What have I done to you? Get out! You're no nephew of mine. As far as I'm concerned, you're as dead as that wretch Cermak.
You have to embellish the words with a certain amount of gravity. Because we're talking about things that are really important here, that are kind of secret. There's a natural kind of darkness when you talk about noir. You know, it's great. I love it.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, Imagination Connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination and the perhaps never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, moi, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm, of course, Robcasting at you from right here in the Robservatory. You Imagination Connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode 1105. Tonight, the Knicks did not win the third game of the NBA Finals. It was a barn burner of a game, but I'm sorry to say they're not going to do it in four. I do think the Knicks will prevail. I think the country needs them to prevail. I think the world needs them to prevail. And I hope they do, because I just want to see the joy in the faces of all New Yorkers, no matter where you may live. Anyway, not to take anything away from the Spurs. They played a great game tonight. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, so today there is a reckoning coming. A reckoning with you viewers who have written me letters about my last shows. If you want to read, if you want me to read a letter on the show live, that's what I'm here for. Robert Meyer Burnett, rmburnett1701 at gmail.com. Put Robservations in the subject. And then hopefully after that, give me a little bit of indication of what you want to discuss. And I'll read just about anything within reason. And I'm just going to jump right in. This first letter is a response to last week's show about Return of the Jedi, and it comes from an industry professional, Vinny Guastini. He has his own makeup effects company. He's actually an incredibly talented guy, very, very, very talented, and he actually worked a little bit on The White Devils, our movie that's going to be coming out on various platforms in January. I can't really talk. I don't know if I can say who's releasing it yet, but it is coming out from a very reputable company that's making a lot of interesting moves these days in the entertainment space. So, of course, I produced that film, and my company is one of the producers of it, Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited. So you will be seeing that. But Vinny actually messed me up for an entire day. Went down to his shop in North Hollywood, and he did some great appliances on my back and messed me up. I bled from my back. I got whipped for an entire day. He also gave us some body parts and did some second unit stuff. So thank you, Vinny. However, Vincent was not at all happy with my assessment of Return of the Jedi, which, let's just jump into it. Vinny, take it away. Okay. First of all, I understand the disconnect some fans have with Return of the Jedi because of the Ewoks. It was very Jim Henson-y. And yes, there was a lot of teddy bear stuff in there. But for me, I enjoyed it. In fact, I happen to like the Ewoks. I didn't like Jar Jar in the newer movies, but I certainly like the Ewoks. So I guess you could say I'm a goober for liking them. But where I don't connect with this criticism is when people dismiss all of the amazing scenes that tie the entire story together. Luke's journey comes full circle. The brother and sister reveal with Luke and Leia gives the saga emotional closure. Han Solo's relationship with Leia finally solidifies, and that whole dynamic pays off beautifully. And let's not forget the speeder bike chase. Oh my God in heaven, I couldn't believe that sequence. It was fast, dangerous, thrilling, completely cinematic, and that alone felt like pure Star Wars, which didn't drive the plot forward at all. It was just basically special effects pornography, even though David Fincher shot some of it. The speeder bike chase is really cool. It makes no difference to the plot. You could remove that from the film, and I mean, you would miss the sequence. My problem with the speeder bike chase is it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't advance the plot. It's literally pornography. Then you have the throne room scenes between the Emperor, Luke, and Vader. No argument there. Some of the most powerful cinematic acting and extraordinary moments in movie history. Luke standing before the Emperor, refusing to turn. Vader watching his son being tortured. First his dad trying to kill him. Some of the best acting out of Mark Hamill I've ever seen. I'll never join you. And then the father and son finally coming together at the end. That is mythic storytelling. Vader killing the Emperor to save Luke burned away any teddy bear nightmares anybody had anything about that film. The scene alone was worth the price of admission. And while we're talking about the Emperor, when he comes out of the shuttle, there was a deliberate reason for how that was handled visually. I happen to know some of this because I work with makeup effects artist Nick Dudman on Last of the Mohicans. From what I understand, there were edge issues with the Emperor makeup, and the prosthetic was starting to show problems around the sides of the face. They had to use an optical effect or some kind of shadow hood trickery to hide the edges of the mask or the prosthetic falling off his face. So even in Jedi, there were practical makeup issues, but that doesn't destroy the movie. That's part of the handmade magic of these films. Unfortunately, they didn't have computer graphics to fix everything, so that's why it looks weird. And that brings me to the creature criticism. If you're arguing that the creatures in Return of the Jedi don't look real, then let's be fair about Star Wars as a whole. Go back to the Cantina Bar. You had a werewolf, a giant grasshopper, a guy in an astronaut suit, women painted blue or green or whatever color they were in the background, and a spy with an elephant nose and goggles. By the way, Hammerhead is awesome. The texture on the nose wasn't even correct. It looked like a vacuum cleaner plug. The creatures in Star Wars always had a goofy, off-center, handmade design. That was part of the charm. They were weird, imperfect, sometimes ridiculous, and completely unforgettable. But it's the way they're presented, Vinny. And you know as well as I know that with special makeup effects, I know this because I worked for Tony Gardner's company for a while, Altarian Studios, makeup effects are all about the lighting. And the lighting in Mos Eisley sold those creatures. Just saying. And let's also not forget Princess Leia's slave outfit, which became one of the most iconic fantasy images for generations of male fans. Whether people want to admit it or not, that image became part of pop culture history. Then there are the sail barges, Jabba the Hutt, Bib Fortuna, and the Rancor, of all things. How does that not feel like Star Wars? The Jabba Palace sequence is loaded with creatures, danger, weirdness, practical effects, puppets, monsters, and that wonderful, dirty underworld feeling that made the original trilogy feel so alive. So yes, I understand that the disconnect with Return of the Jedi has always been mostly about teddy bears, but other than that, if the Ewoks were edited down or removed, this is still an amazing film. Even with them in it, I was not let down at all. I've heard all the complaints, all the rejects, and all the people who don't like Jedi, but I totally and utterly disagree. For anyone to say they have a total disconnect with Return of the Jedi or that it didn't feel right as Star Wars just does not make sense to me. I love you to death as a friend, but sometimes when people come up with this stuff, like loving the new Superman and then turning around and dismissing Return of the Jedi, sorry, I'm going to say it, baloney. LOL, I just don't get it. For me, Return of the Jedi absolutely feels like Star Wars. It has the emotion, the mythology, the adventure, the creatures, the spectacle, the romance, the humor, the darkness, and the redemption. The father and son ending is one of the strongest emotional payoffs in movie history, and that alone puts the film in a category far above what the Ewok criticism tries to reduce it to now. It is better than Empire. No, Empire Strikes Back is probably one of the best science fiction films of all time, and Star Trek had its own Empire Strikes Back with Wrath of Khan, which is one of the best movies in the series. I'm still not finished with this, and I may come back and add more. In any event, I love your podcast, but I find a lot of your views are very incorrect, even from a Star Wars fan. Laugh out loud. In fact, what you have to say is your opinion just as much as it's my opinion of what I like about it, and what you hate about it doesn't make it necessarily fact. Best, Vinny, from VGP Effects and Design Studio. And that has a website, VGPeffects, that's one word, .com. VGPEFFECTS.com. And Vinny, I love you to death too. You're an incredible talent, but you're wrong on this one. No, here's the thing. I am not here to tell people what they should believe. This is a misconception that gets thrown at me all the time. Look, I believe, I've said this before, I believe that there is certain great art that is objectively great, that taps into something we might not be able to explain, but there is, call it Jungian, I don't know what you want to call it, but I think that there is some great art that transcends opinion or perception. And I think maybe it's because human consciousness is, delving into something that we don't quite understand. However, people's opinions of art are definitely subjective. And they're also based on what people know and don't know. And I've always said that, look, when I am going to go see an exhibition of something, I try and do some research on what I'm going to see, because if I go in cold, and it's like going to a symphony or going to a museum, any art, any populist art, if I go to a ballet, if I don't do some research before I go see something like this, if I spend hundreds of dollars on tickets to go see something, I do some research. I read up on the artist, I read up on the composer, I read up on whomever it is that I'm going to see, so I have context when I go in. Because if I don't appreciate, I can't. I mean, I can appreciate music and it can hit me the way it hits me, and I can make a decision based on that. But it's a far richer experience if you understand something about who the composer was, where they're coming from, what were the things that they were interested in conveying through their art. And it's the same thing that's true, I think, of anything. Any opinion you might have, I don't know, about certain global conflicts, the more you know about it and the more that you've examined one side or the other, I feel these days a lot of nuance is lost, and a lot of people have woefully misinformed opinions about many, many things because they haven't done the research. And some people would say, well, what difference does it make? Well, it makes a lot of difference if, your opinions are swaying other people. I've always believed you can never go wrong learning more things. And I remember once hearing, never think you know everything about a subject. Because if you think you know everything, then you stop thinking about it and you're not open to hearing new ideas. And I think that there's new ideas to be had for every single thing in the world. And, especially these days when everyone's getting so much of their information off the internet, you're always getting very biased opinions. And now we're looking at only places that we tend to agree with, which makes it even worse. When it comes to Return of the Jedi, I can point to a few things that people will poo-poo that really bother me in terms of the film. And I'll give you an example. When C-3PO and R2-D2 fall off Jabba's sail barge, head first into the sand, and there's an insert shot where you see C-3PO's legs and R2 sticking up out of the sand, and then the magnet comes down and pulls them up. It's ridiculous. And the backdrop is terrible. And I look at that and I ask myself, you've established the characters of R2 and 3PO have a comedic banter to them that really is derived from Kurosawa's movie The Hidden Fortress. And I suggest everybody go and watch The Hidden Fortress. You'll get a whole new appreciation for Star Wars. But what I don't like about that scene is it's a humorous beat it's humorous because it's at the expense of our characters. It diminishes our characters. And I don't like that. And Return of the Jedi is a film that is constantly diminishing our heroes. Seeing Han Solo turn around and say, hey, it's me, really bothers me. Because that to me was totally out of character. And I felt that in the situation that they are in, I don't think that Han Solo would be cracking those kinds of jokes. And for me, the problem with Return of the Jedi is not just the Ewoks, as I tried to explain it. It's a film that has a very exciting, swashbuckling side story that opens the film, the rescue of Han Solo, and it has an incredible climax. The rest of the movie, even Vinny said it's got this great ending, and he likes the speeder bike chase. It's a film, like, the entirety of Empire Strikes Back resonates on many different levels. And what I really don't like is, and I think this is very egregious, is that the characters of Han and Leia are really sidelined. They don't go anywhere. Nothing's going on between them. You can talk about their relationship being solidified, but it's so lightweight compared to what's happening with Luke. And as I said, I really wanted to see a Return of the King inspired ending that was that big. And people would say, well, Rob, remember, I'd already read Lord of the Rings. So in 1983, when Jedi came out, after seeing Star Wars and Empire, the tone of Jedi is entirely different. And it's entirely different from the very beginning of the movie. And when you get to Jabba's palace, I'm sorry, I don't find anything about Jabba's palace credible. The whole thing is designed to make you laugh. The whole thing is designed to put you in a space where everything is sort of not that serious. And I think that's my problem with Return of the Jedi. The tone of it is all over the place, and I think it's just not, it doesn't work for me at all. Now, the end is great, but even the way the Emperor is depicted, and it's hard to explain this to people now because they can't see the way the Emperor was depicted in Empire Strikes Back because they changed it. They changed the Emperor from Clive Revel and his voice performance to Ian McDermott. They changed the dialogue. And so, for me, someone who saw The Empire Strikes Back 26 times in a theater, the thing about the Emperor was he had this quiet calmness to him that made him even scarier. And when the Emperor shows up in Jedi, for me, it's not about the facial prosthetics. It's about the fact that he looks like the witch from Snow White. I'm like, he was not the guy that Vader kneeled before in Empire Strikes Back. Nowadays, most people wouldn't know that because they've only seen the special edition of Empire, where Ian McDermott is a great actor. But in Return of the Jedi, his performance is so over the top because we'd never seen the Emperor before other than in a hologram in Empire Strikes Back. So it was the very first time we ever saw the Emperor, and we hadn't seen Ian McDermott in the prequels yet. So, well, the battle station will be operational when your friends arrive. And somebody explained it to me thus. Somebody left a comment on my show, on the Return of the Jedi show, I thought was incredibly insightful. They noticed that when I was growing up, you had Star Wars at 10, you had Empire Strikes Back when I was 13. And these were movies that were showing me, within a fantasy context, the world getting more complex and difficult to deal with. And Return of the Jedi was a reversion back to more of a childlike state. And where I expected it to go is to the most adult level of all three Star Wars movies. And it just doesn't do that. And it has always been a disappointment to me. And it's never not going to be a disappointment to me. A lot of people saw the Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi was the first Star Wars movie they saw in the theaters. And I would never begrudge somebody for liking the film. But for me, it's never going to work. And it remains the single most disappointing film-going experience I ever had. Because in a way, as somebody who's always been a seeker, Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back meant it's difficult to explain what those movies meant to me because there was nothing like them. And as a child of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, that was, I mean, it's difficult to explain how deeply immersed in all of this I was. And when you think about it, the text of the stuff that I was watching, whether it was classic Star Trek, whether it was Twilight Zone, whether it was Outer Limits, the movies I was watching, Planet of the Apes, changed my life. I was even talking about Colossus, the Foreman Project. When I was 9, I saw Logan's Run in the theater, along with Fantastic Planet, which still to this day is my favorite animated film of all time. All of these things, the things that I loved, the things that brought me to science fiction, fantasy, and horror, was the literary nature of these things. That they were sort of explorations of humanity, of a human world that I had yet to enter because I was a child. But I knew that I was being given things bequeathed within the context of these juicy sci-fi, fantasy, and horror delightful entertainments that were above my pay grade, that I knew that becoming an adult would make me understand what I was watching. And at the same time, it was instilling, all of these things were instilling a sense of the adult world, and it was a world I wanted to join. You know, when you go back, I mean, remember, I first saw Planet of the Apes when I was a 5-year-old kid, and it was the same year I saw War of the Worlds, the original War of the Worlds. And the thing about these movies was I was captivated as a kid. And sure, the promise of monsters or special effects or spaceships or whatever, that's what that got me in there initially. But it was the compelling stories that I would stay for. I mean, the first Twilight Zone episode I remember seeing was To Serve Man. You know? And it was... I can't tell you what that did to my worldview. It was... put the zap on me. But anyway, Vinny, I want to thank you for writing this great letter. And, you know, I really appreciate your words and your talent. So this next one comes to us from Thomas Alvin. And let's see what Thomas has to say. Watching movies then and now. Greetings, Rob. Now, hear me out. 2 Christmases ago, I was staying in the old family house outside Stockholm, where I grew up for one last time. And just like when I was a kid, there was only a few TV channels available. Actually, one more than when I grew up, when we only had the 2 channels broadcast by the Swedish public television, sort of like the Swedish BBC. So in the evenings, I had to check the now online TV guide to see what was on and choose something. One night, they showed The Deer Hunter. So I rewatched it for the first time since I first saw it in my early 20s. I'm frankly a bit mixed on the movie, but I'm glad that I saw it again. It is undoubtedly a landmark movie with some great scenes. My favorite is probably the corrupt French guy who says that when a man says no to champagne, he says no to life, which is something I wholeheartedly agree with. But I couldn't deny that the main reason I watched it again was that I didn't have much of a choice. In my home in Brussels, I have several streaming services, and probably The Deer Hunter is available on one of them, but I frankly doubt that I would have chosen to rewatch a 3-hour slow-burning movie about the madness of war and what it does to ordinary people over whatever shiny new Netflix production or recent movie release would be on random offer on a Saturday evening. This made me think about how we consumed movies back in the day. Either you went to the movie theater or you had to settle for something that was shown on TV. As noted, only 2 channels in Sweden in the 80s. I assume you had a bit more choice in the US. Well, we only really had 5. Eventually, the VHS player arrived, and thus the opportunity to rent a movie if your parents agreed to drive you to the video rental store. But that happened at best once a week until I was old enough to move to my own place. But that was, of course, much later. So mostly, you were stuck with whatever selection some dude at the TV Broadcasting Corporation has chosen for you. Now, I'm all for the free markets and consumer choice, and I wouldn't want to go back to the way things were back then, but I have to admit that these poor circumstances made me watch a lot of stuff that I probably would never have seen. and that this greatly contributed to expanding my mind when it came to movies, great directors, and actors, the history of cinema, and storytelling. Because I can tend to be a bit lazy and opt for the lighthearted McDonald's option instead of something more chewy, especially if I'm tired or otherwise not in the mood. It's almost a bit of a paradox. Back then you had almost no choice, but often ended up enjoying or at least appreciating whatever you saw, whereas today you have all the choice in the world, but this for me often results in an endless flicking back and forth on Netflix because you don't feel in the mood for anything. You're spoiled for choice. And the possibility to walk back your choice if you don't absolutely love the first 5 minutes of a movie and choose something else can in itself put a damper on the watching experience. You're sitting at a huge smorgasbord filled to the brim with all the food you can think of, but you already feel full, and the sight of the colorful offerings almost make you feel nauseous. So my question is, has the everything available instantly on demand society made us worse as consumers of high-quality movies and TV? Or is it just me that has the character of a 5-year-old? Whatever the case may be, I'm happy to hear your views. Yours sincerely, Thomas Alvin, May 30th, Brussels. Thomas, great letter. He is absolutely correct. Now, it's hard. It's hard for me. I am very pleased. I'm very lucky about when I was born and what I got to see, because I got to see an enormous. Entertainment being my focus and wanting to make movies and all that. I got to see an enormous sea change and a shift in the entertainment space during my lifetime. And if I were to know where we would be today, when I was 5 years old, I would have blown my mind. And I do think, look, I've often said that watching movies, like anything else, is a skill. And I've often told people that when I started going to the Seattle International Film Festival, actually The Empire Strikes Back was the first SIFF movie I ever saw, believe it or not, for all you stuck-up fuckheads that run at SIFF now, but I'm just kidding. I won't tell that story again, but so SIFF was very important to me. But I had to train myself when I started to become a full series pass holder in 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88. When I was a full series pass holder, I was seeing 200 movies from all over the world in a month. And a lot of these films were difficult sits, difficult watches, because they were all kinds of different movies. And it helped me, started going in junior high school, and it helped me train myself. If I found a movie to be slow or disinteresting in the beginning, I sort of could put myself in a Zen state and let go of that and just let the film wash over me. But it was something that I had to learn over the course of seeing many movies that I found incredibly boring and not very engaging at the Seattle International Film Festival. And again, they were subtitled as well. So it taught me how to watch things and give things a chance and to not change a channel. But when I was younger, Thomas is right. You had the three networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS. We had an independent station, Channel 11, and then we got another one, Channel 13. So that was 4. And then we had our PBS station. We only had 5 channels to watch. And when movies would come on, I would watch, when James Bond movies would come on, I'd watch those. When Wizard of Oz came on, when a big theatrical release that I might have missed, even though it was like an R-rated movie, the only way I could see it is the cut version on TV. I would soak this stuff up. And it also taught you would sit down and you would watch. You would watch. It didn't matter what, you would watch. And the thing about that was that's how I discovered something like Planet of the Apes for the first time. I'd never heard about it before, and the only reason that I accidentally was flipping channels after something was over right before my bedtime, trying to get a glimpse of one last thing before I went to bed, and there was a guy doing a ship's log, and I knew that because of Star Trek. And I'm like, but that's not Star Trek. Why is he doing a ship's log? I knew what it was, and then I'm watching this thinking it was the end of the movie. And then once they crashed into Lake Powell, I ran up the 2 flights of stairs to my mom's room and breathlessly begged her to let me watch the rest of the film. I didn't even know what Planet of the Apes was at that time. But talk about mind blown, mine was. And again, it was one of those galvanizing moments in your life that you'll never forget. That War of the Worlds, when I was 5, Twilight Zone, Star Trek, all of it, locked in as a 5-year-old kid. I'm not saying that made me precocious anyway. It was just what I was interested in. I was still reading fucking Frog and Toad are Friends, so, and the 7 Chinese Brothers. You know, I did like all that stuff too, but it was all crazy. But yeah, I think back then we learned, and I did the same thing. I'll just flick through Netflix and look at and see what's available, and not settle on something, or end up watching something I've already watched. You know, I'll come across, one of my favorite things in the world is Alan Moore's Watchmen comic book, Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore. And I, you know, there's 3 versions of Watchmen that I own of the movie, and I have a real problem with the film. And I watched an incredible YouTube video that I cannot find again, that it nailed, this guy nailed why the movie doesn't really work. Even though I do like the movie, but it doesn't really work. And he nailed it, and I can't find this video again because I wanted to send it to a friend of mine. So I watched that video on YouTube. I find myself watching YouTube, all kinds of YouTube videos, op-eds and things. But remember, and because people send me YouTube videos, you have to watch this. And I'm like, yeah, this one YouTube video is not the only thing you need to watch, you know? But a lot of people get their information. I watched this one YouTube video, and that's it for me. I don't need to learn anything more. I'm like, okay. But I watched this YouTube video about Watchmen, and I went back and started watching the movie. I got sucked in. You know, you have to watch the Ultimate Edition, which has the Tales of the Black Freighter animated sequences, which I don't think work at all in a movie, because it defeats the purpose of why that is even in the comic. But okay, that's neither here nor there. But listen, I want to say I really love this letter, Thomas. And yeah, I think now that we have everything available, we're not learning and not experiencing much of anything, because you don't have to ever lock in. If you don't, like I used to know, we knew that you're going to lock in. There's nothing else to watch, so you're watching whatever. Now people are half watching things, and they're missing the nuance, and they're not internalizing things the way that we used to. And I think another reason, and we're going to get to that later, is that there's an inversion. The audience is more interested in themselves than they're actually interested in what they're watching. And that's something I've been talking about on this channel for 8 years. Thanks for that letter, though. This one comes to us from Robert Coleman, who's written a lot lately. Hey, Rob, hope all is well, brother. The other night when discussing Star Trek, you'd mentioned that Star Trek the Motion Picture was your favorite of the Star Trek films. Did I hear this correctly? If so, then that's another thing we have in common. By the way, yes, you did. As I agree with you. In my youth, I, like many, thought The Wrath of Khan was superior, but over time, my option shifted as the contemplative nature of the motion picture feels more in line with the original series with its sense of wonder, philosophy, and exploration. I remember reading reviews by critics who always seemed to harp on the scene of Kirk and Scotty flying around the Enterprise when we were first introduced to it. For me, that's one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Trek. The way it was filmed and edited, along with Goldsmith's wondrous score, making the whole scene play out in an epic, majestic, and grandiose manner, while modern audiences find it slow and boring. For me, the deliberate pacing I found refreshing. To be honest, Star Trek the Motion Picture is probably the closest cinematic expression of the original series we have, for it tackles big ideas, which is the cornerstone of the best science fiction. Star Trek the Motion Picture remains a thoughtful exploration of humanity, consciousness, and the search for meaning. You have shared your experiences about seeing Star Wars in 1977. I would love to hear your thoughts about the first time you saw Star Trek the Motion Picture. Thank you, and as always, rock on, brother. Robert Coleman. Well, you're going to get no argument from me. I will never forget the first day that I saw Star Trek the Motion Picture. Again, I know people have heard me tell this story before, but I should take a drink of alcohol before I tell this one. So I would be hard pressed to impart to you viewers out there how important Star Trek was to me growing up. Now, I started watching Star Trek in 1972 when it went into strip syndication when I was 5 years old. And it played on Channel 11 every weeknight at 6 p.m. I was obsessed with Star Trek. Absolutely obsessed with everything about it. And I love the characters. I love the design. Maybe the colors were what put the zap in my head in the first place. The Enterprise was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. It is I don't know what you want, but it's my fertility god, my fetish object. I've got various iterations. There's the Playmobil Enterprise over there. There's the Tomy refit Enterprise over there. There's the Master Replicas Enterprise over there. There's all kinds of Star Trek spaceships filling these shelves. But the thing about Star Trek, and also during this time, the animated series, the 22 episodes over 2 seasons of the animated Star Trek came out. And even on Saturday mornings, while the animation, it was crude and done cheaply, for the most part, you had most of the crew returning. You had a lot of the same writers returning. And the stories, the animated stories, were interesting as well. Now, at the same time, the James Blish adaptations of the original series episodes were available, and I was buying them. And I would read them. I would get them in my elementary school library. We had a few of them. And then I was buying them as they came out. And my mom was buying them for me. And my father would read them to me, and then that was part of the reason I started reading at a very young age, probably mostly to read the Blish adaptations of Star Trek stories. And then in 1975, these Franz Joseph Star Trek Technical Manual and Enterprise Blueprints were published, and the conceit of both of those things is that they were manufactured as if they actually came from the 23rd century. They were drawn totally. The blueprints and the technical manual were, once you unpack them, were presented as in Star Trek in-universe things. Now, no one had ever done that before, So suddenly, and I thought about Star Trek all the time. I thought about the storylines, and then you had these totems, these totemic things. You had the Enterprise blueprints, which weren't even canon, but I didn't know the difference between canon back then. And also during this time, there were model kits of the Enterprise, the Klingon D7, the shuttlecraft, the K7 station, the exploration set of the phaser, the communicator, and the tricorder. So, and then the Mego figures came out. So much of my life was consumed by Star Trek. And of course, there was no internet, there was no information, so I didn't know that they tried to make Star Trek Planet of the Titans. I didn't know that there was going to be a Star Trek Phase 2 TV series until after post-Star Wars. Suddenly I was aware of science fiction magazines like Starlog, like Cinefantastique, like Fantastic Films, and all the other smaller magazines that came out. I got Famous Monsters of Filmland, of course. But Star Trek I felt like I knew what it was like to be a fundamentalist Christian who thinks about the Lord, because I thought about Star Trek like that, and I was really, really deeply immersed in Star Trek. And when B. Joe Trimble's Star Trek Concordance came out, it allowed me, I memorized all the episodes, and it had a sort of a glossary or a dictionary element to it. There was so much stuff that was coming out, and Star Trek novels. I did not differentiate between Star Trek novels and the TV series. I didn't know the idea that I figured if there's Star Trek novels coming out, well, they have to be real, like real. I didn't know the difference between canon, what is canon and what isn't. I figured if they're releasing Star Trek novels, they have to be canon, even when they weren't good, like Kathleen Sky's Vulcan. And they were weird. You had Spock Messiah and Spock Must Die, and then you had other books coming out, The Starless World and Trek to Mad World, and then Vonda Marshak and Myrna Colbraith's Star Trek The New Voyages anthologies that came out. And then they wrote their crazy fucking books, The Price of the Phoenix and The Fate of the Phoenix. I mean, I devoured all of this stuff. Devoured it all. And to me, you know, my fandom, I was not just a literary... And then the Gold Key Star Trek comics, I tried to make sense of those. So there was a comic component, a literary component, a plastic model component, a toy component. So it was an all-encompassing thing for me. And I was deeply, deeply, deeply immersed in all of this. Probably, I wouldn't say it was to an unhealthy degree, but I spent a lot of time thinking about Star Trek. So, when the news that a Star Trek movie was going to be made post-Star Wars, it's hard to explain. I mean, it really was the second coming. And, you know, first Spock wasn't going to be in the movie, then he was going to be in the movie, and you didn't know. It was just, but the anticipation that I felt in my mind. And then it was going to be $44 million, and Robert Wise, who directed West Side Story, which I'd seen already and loved that movie. And, of course, he directed The Andromeda Strain and The Day the Earth Stood Still, and he'd edited Citizen Kane and made Curse of the Cat People. I'm like, oh, my fucking God. Robert Wise is directing this movie? So you knew that they were taking it seriously. Like, somebody knew. Somebody knows. Somebody knew. They knew that this is not silliness. This is really important stuff, making a new Star Trek movie. So the anticipation for this Star Trek movie was, in my mind, off the charts. I mean, I don't think that, as much as I thought about it, I don't think I've ever anticipated anything in my life as much as I anticipated seeing Star Trek the Motion Picture. And, you know, I went back and there was I did not have a VCR. So I couldn't go back and rewatch the episodes because there was no way to do it. You had the 12 photo novels that allowed you, and then I had made audio cassettes of the episodes and reading the concordance and just going through. It was just insane. So the Star Trek mythology, armed with all of that, and the thing about it is, another thing that is hard to explain to people is in a way, I thought of Star Trek stories, they were parables, you know, I thought about what happened inside Star Trek stories and was constantly equating them to real life, rightly or wrongly. And I did that with Twilight Zone. I did that with Outer Limits. I did that with UFO, Jerry Anderson's UFO, Space 1999, the movies that I would see. I mean, but Star Trek episodes in particular, I was trying to equate to my own life, rightly or wrongly. And when Star Trek the Motion Picture came out, I was in the 7th grade. It was December 7th, 1979, and I was in the 7th grade. And I went to South Mercer Junior High, that's now Mercer Island Middle School in Mercer Island, Washington is my hometown, where I'm from, suburb of Seattle, which I could never afford to live on now. So I went to school, and I had black pants on, and I had a Star Trek uniform top. And I had, on my uniform top, I had I'd somehow gotten Star Trek the Motion Picture buttons, and they were on the shirt. And for whatever reason, I took my technical manual with me. And the first show of Star Trek the Motion Picture, it was Friday, was going to be at 7:30 in the afternoon. Now, I had to take two buses. I had from the south end of Mercer Island, and I think it was if I remember, it was the 202, then I had to take the 226 to Bellevue, and it would drop me off in Bellevue, and I had to walk a few blocks to get to the John Dance Theater in downtown Bellevue, where I'd seen Logan's Run. And I would see Spy Who Loved Me after a few months after. Oh, no, I'd seen Spy Who Loved Me after Star Wars opened. So and I'd seen Superman the movie there. It was one of my favorite movie theaters. It was gigantic. It was huge. This huge big box theater. So when I got to school that day, I immediately got there, and I was taken into the girls' bathroom by Mike Elfendahl, who kind of beat the shit out of me because I was wearing a Star Trek uniform. and Star Trek buttons. And, I'd put my technical manual in my office. And, he pushed me into the girls' bathroom. And, he didn't just totally destroy me. But, pushed me into a stall. He beat me up pretty good. So that's how I started my day. But it didn't matter. I just didn't care. I'm like, whatever. You make fun of me all you want, douche. But we were friends later. Mark Alvinol, his younger brother, was in my grade. And I'd known, gone to kindergarten together. But anyway, so ninth graders have to flex their muscle. And I got a lot of flack that day. It was seventh grade, man. What are you going to do? And then fifth period, I had Mr. Johnson for earth science. And we had a test. And in earth science, we had two desks. We had desks that we sat at with two people at them. And they were these kind of like black slate tops with wooden legs. And I was sitting with one of my classmates named Sabika Jati. She's Indian. Sabika Jati, and there was just the two of us, and we had a test. And I was so preoccupied. I'm just taking this test, and I'm like literally viewing I wasn't even paying attention. I wasn't looking at anything. Mr. Johnson, who was a bald guy, very curmudgeonly, he looked like your typical evil, mean teacher in a movie, right out of Central Casting. He comes and he grabs me by the shoulder, and he pulls me up out of my chair, and he brings me to the front door of the classroom and pushes me out into the hall and tells me to sit against the wall until class is over, because I was clearly cheating and looking at Sabika's paper, which I wasn't doing. I mean, it happened I was literally, I couldn't think of anything else but what this movie was going to be like. And now I've been accused of cheating, and I got beat up. So anyway, finally the school day was over. I walked from south to our local, where there's like a shopping center, a QFC, and Lakeside Drugs, and I was there, and where I got the bus, and I was on the bus, and I'm all excited, and nothing else mattered. I'm on the bus going to see Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I got down to the north end of Mercer Island, made my transfer on the 226, and I've got my Star Trek technical manual with me, and I've got my buttons on, and I'm like, yes. And I met some people on the bus, older than me, and they knew I was a Star Trek fan, and these were like significantly older. They might have been in college, but I was in seventh grade, so they seemed much older. But we started talking about Star Trek, and I was like, and they're like, oh man, and they, you're such a cool kid and all this stuff, and I'm talking about Star Trek. So they say to me that they have friends that have been standing in line, and they'll see me, maybe they'll see me in the theater. So they get off the bus, and I don't see them, and then I make my way over to the theater. And I mean, I should have known better, but there was no way. My parents were busy or something. There was no way I could have got to the theater, and I couldn't. No one's going to let me skip school at 12. I didn't get that. I couldn't have done it. I had to go to school. So I get to the theater, and there's a gigantic line. It's all around and I'm at the back. I'm at the very back of the line. And it is very apparent to me. I didn't realize that there was this many Star Trek fans in the world, because I didn't know that there. And I should have known better from Star Wars, but I didn't think about it. And I was at the end of the line, and I just thought about the day that I had, and I just started crying, because I knew that I wasn't. It's funny. I haven't thought about this in a long time, and thinking I'm having this weird. It's so weird. This sense memory. I literally, like, I'm thinking about this. Is so sorry. I have to collect. This is such. Anyway, so sorry. I was at the back of this line, and I just started to cry. And it was one of those things where, look, nobody died, like, talk about it. You think about first world problems. I was crying, and it was bad. It was so sorry. It was bad. Thinking about this. Such a weird. So anyway, I was just sitting there, and then I hear, hey, and those kids on the bus, those older kids or college students, two of them had come back, because I think there was like 4 or 5 of them. Two of them had come back, and they found me at the end of the line. And I was crying, and they said, "Hey, you come up and hang out with us. We're at the front of the line." So I'm trying to wipe my eyes. I didn't want them to know. They probably knew. Maybe that's why they came and got me. So I come to the front of the line, and they're probably about 50 people away from the door to the John Dance Theater. Now, I can tell you exactly what time it was. It was probably about 4:15 in the afternoon right now. And at 4:30, for whatever reason, the staff of the John Dance Theater opened up the theater 3 hours or whatever before the movie opened. Now, the John Dance Theater was it was huge, this huge big box theater. You'd walk in, and it was split into two. There was when you walk in, and the lobby was gigantic because it was they're also SRO, the Sterling Recreation Organization. It was their headquarters. Their headquarters was also in the theater, another part of the theater. So you'd walk in, and they had the lower tier and then the upper tier, and it was big like this. And I'd gone in with them, and we sat in the upper tier, close to the front, where the railing is. So we're incredible seats, and so it's 3 hours before the movie, and the excitement was palpable. And then these were my people, man. I'd never been around so many Star Trek fans in my life. And then people started talking about Star Trek episodes, and it was like this impromptu trivia contest, and people were talking about their favorite episodes and what happened there, and I just said, "Oh, that's Requiem for Methuselah, or that's Arena, or Is There in Truth No Beauty, or whatever." So then somebody says, "Well, put the kid up in the front. He can moderate or whatever." So I'm clearly the youngest person there. Everybody there is college age or adults or whatever, and I'm clearly the youngest person there. So I get up to the front. They put me up at the front, like I'm not in the exact front because there's stairs there, but there's people sitting there, but I'm off to the side, and I end up like moderating this Star Trek trivia contest, or people are talking about Star Trek, and I was the impromptu moderator because I knew all the episode titles. And so what was a very terrible, terrible. I mean, look, I could have been dying of terminal cancer, and I should have been crying for that, but it was not a good moment at that time. But it turned into the greatest. I mean, for me, there I was moderating this conversation, and then the movie. We all sit down. Now, nobody knew this, but Star Trek: The Motion Picture had an overture. Now, I want to say that I had already bought the soundtrack album. I'm not sure of this. I don't remember. But it was Ilea's theme, kind of the love theme of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which is a gorgeous piece of music. And, there was no image. It was just the music. And movies really didn't have overtures anymore. So, and then it started with the bombastic dun 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 dun, and then the theme hits, and then Star Trek: The Motion Picture rolls out, and it's hard to explain how. I mean, it was like being in church. It was like the second coming. Everything was like. In my mind, the Star Trek universe was always much bigger than it was on TV, because I was reading the books and I had built the models and I'd imagined so many times what it would be like. So the Star Trek universe was always much bigger in my imagination. And this was the first time everything in Star Trek: The Motion Picture was ginormous. We'd never seen Earth before, at least not the Earth of the 20th century, or of the 23rd century. We'd seen the past Earth and things like that, but we'd never seen 23rd century Earth. You got to see 20th century Earth. You got to see our characters in ways we hadn't seen them before. Kirk was kind of annoyed, pissed off. McCoy was pissed off. And Spock failed at the culinary discipline. Now, I had read Gene Roddenberry's crazy novelization, so I knew what the story was going to be. Long story short, I thought Star Trek the Motion Picture, it was not just a movie. It was a transcendent experience that I can't ever explain and would never be able to have again in my life, ever. And when it was over, going out into the lobby, there was a television crew there interviewing people about what they thought of the film, and they interviewed me, and I was on the news that night talking about Star Trek the Motion Picture, the local news. So that was a day full of very many thoughts and feelings. But Star Trek the Motion Picture has always been my favorite Star Trek movie. I agree that it is the closest thing to the original series, because people forget the pop culture memory of what Star Trek is. People tend to remember it as a very campy. They tend to remember it only kind of one way. But Star Trek is basically an anthology show with recurring characters. And there were different kinds of Star Trek episodes. And Star Trek the Motion Picture, there was one of my very favorite Star Trek episodes that not a lot of people love, is a second season episode called The Immunity Syndrome. And I love that episode. I love The Immunity Syndrome. And Star Trek the Motion Picture has more in common with episodes like The Doomsday Machine and The Immunity Syndrome than it does to, say, Shore Leave or The Trouble with Tribbles or Arena or things like that. So to me, the contemplative, serious nature of Star Trek the Motion Picture appealed to my 12-year-old sensibility. I'm like, damn it, this movie's important. And it gave me that. Now, I do think that the director's edition of Star Trek the Motion Picture, while imperfect, they just needed me to consult more, and it would have been better. But, and I mean that sincerely, one day I will sit down and make my definitive version of Star Trek the Motion Picture. But I do think that the 4K director's edition of Star Trek the Motion Picture is the best it's ever been. There are things that need to be changed in it, but that's just me. But it's my favorite Star Trek movie. Now, here's the thing. I think that an argument could be made that Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is a better movie. And I think indeed it probably is. Certainly a movie for the masses. But for me, for my money, Star Trek the Motion Picture is the Star Trek that I love. Now, does that invalidate my point of view? No, I love Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan as well. I can recite it chapter and verse. But to me, Star Trek the Motion Picture took Star Trek someplace it hadn't gone to. It was an evolution. Yeah, you could say the storyline emulated the Changeling, and it was similar to what we'd seen before, where Star Trek II was closer to the TV series itself, as opposed to being more of the bummer about the Star Trek franchise is it could have become a much bigger, more expansive cinematic experience. But because of the various production issues that happened, and I won't go into them, but there's a really incredible book. I think it's called Return to Tomorrow that Lucas Kendall and Taylor White published. Taylor White published it, and Lucas consulted on it, which is one of the great making of books ever. And if you can find it, seek it out. But famously, the problem was that the TV division, run by Harv Bennett, they brought in the TV division to make the Star Trek movies. So there was definitely television production and television sensibility that were instilled in those films. And so Star Trek the Motion Picture is an outlier. And it would have been very interesting to see if Star Trek the Motion Picture built on that and it became this gigantic, expansive, cinematic franchise. I mean, it still was fine, but it certainly didn't. No one's ever going to look back at the Star Trek films and say, "Oh, this is incredible cinema." But Star Trek the Motion Picture is. So there's my long-winded tale of Star Trek the Motion Picture, and I almost cried on camera, so there you go. I hope you're all happy. This next one comes from Gregory Voigt, who says, "Hi, Mr. Burnett. I hope this email finds you well. I loved your analysis of Obsession. You often discuss the literary background required to make a truly effective horror or supernatural film. As a Gen Z filmmaker, I wondered where I should start when it comes to supernatural literature. I have read some notable works of horror, from Turn of the Screw to The Haunting of Hill House to I Am Legend to a number of Stephen King books, but I wondered what other works I should read. Any recommendations would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time. Best, Gregory Voigt." Well, Gregory, that's a great question. Well, first of all, since you've read Stephen King, it's dated now because the book came out in 1982, but I cannot recommend Stephen King's book Dance Macabre more or enough. Basically, he wrote a book. It's a nonfiction book on horror, where he talks about horror and his experience with horror, and he delves into the genre, and I love that book. I've got it. It's right up there. I've got my copy right up there. And I love that book. It's an incredible book, and in terms of the mechanics of horror, it's an incredible work. Now, I also can't recommend enough horror short stories, like the world's best horror collections. I love short horror fiction. Charles Grant published some great books like Shadows, the Shadows series. But World's Best Horror was great. Horror anthologies I dearly love, and that way you just get such an overview of the genre. Now, there's many different kinds. There's so much horror out there. And to be fair, I mean, I grew up reading a lot of it, 70s and 80s horror. But, Clive Barker's The Books of Blood, I think, are essential reading. And, Clive Barker's novels, while out there, I think there's a lot of great stuff. But his Books of Blood, the 6 Books of Blood, are essential reading. And then there's all kinds of, I love the splatterpunk books of John Skipp and Craig Spector. The Light at the End being the first, The Cleanup, and then, of course, my beloved book, The Scream, The Bridge, Animals. I love those books. David Skow's Seeing Red, his book of short stories. Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho. Robert Bloch has a lot of great short stories that I would recommend. Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected is a great anthology. Same Roald Dahl who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. They even made a TV series of Tales of the Unexpected. But there's so many books. Dan Simmons, who wrote everyone's favorite science fiction duology, Hyperion, actually quadrilogy, because you've got Endymion and Rise of Endymion too. But Dan Simmons started out writing horror, and he wrote a short story that I read in Twilight Zone magazine called The River Styx Runs Upstream. That was the first Dan Simmons thing that I ever read, which is terrific. But his novels, Carrion Comfort and Song of Kali, and there's so many. I mean, there's so many horror novels that are great. But I could go on and on. I'd have to, but the great thing about horror to me is horror anthologies there's endless amounts of them with so many great short stories in them. Kathy Koja or Poppy Bright's Lost Souls. Love that book. That's one off the top of my head. Anne Rice, Interview with the Vampire and the Vampire Lestat. I mean, those two are the Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back of Anne Rice books. So the Vampire Lestat and the TV series, I think, starts tonight. I got to watch that. I can't wait. But there's so much good stuff to read. A lot of good stuff out there. So, one day I've got to make a reading list. I'll give my essential reading list. So, Corey Cook writes, "Dear Rob, it has taken me quite some time to work up the courage to send you this particular letter. While I've sent you letters in the past that you've graciously read on the air, this one I've put off for some time now. As corny as it may sound, you have truly inspired me over the years to keep going in my movie endeavors, whether it's broadening my film horizons and palette or reading various novels you've suggested. Big thanks for recommending the Joe Ledger novels. They are fire. By the way, those are other great horror novels, but read them in order. Also, you know what, speaking of horror, you know, it seems cliche, but go back and read Thomas Harris's Read Red Dragon. And there's a Canadian writers who has written a long-standing series of books, the Special X books. And I know I've recommended these before, but Michael Slade is the pen name. And the first 4 Michael Slade books, Headhunter, Ghoul, Ripper, and Cutthroat. Bruh. And it's about the Special X division of the Canadian Royal Mounted Police, the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. There is no Special X division, but they are mean, nasty serial killer books that are set in Canada. And I will say this: the second book, Ghoul, I read in spring break in Palm Springs, my grandparents' house, and every time I read it, I thought I was going to get discovered, and they were going to be so disappointed in me. That book fucking blew my mind. So anyway, there's another one. Incidentally, I'm about to celebrate my 16th year writing for a movie website called House of Geekery. There were times when I wanted to abandon it, but I kept going, and I sincerely believe I'm a better writer because of it and because of you. Well, that's very nice to say. Moreover, for the past 6 years, I've run a movie podcast with my dear friend Luke called Movie Chumps that now has over 200 episodes and counting. It has given me sustenance for my soul and is such a part of my life that I can't imagine my life without it. You were in no small part an inspiration to not only expand it, but refine it until it became the well-oiled machine it is now. Well, thank you very much. Or at least I'd like to think so. All of this preamble is just to ask you this. Would you ever be willing to come on our podcast to discuss your background, the state of the movie industry, thoughts on where the future lies, AI, etc.? We would love to pick your brain and believe you would make a marvelous guest. I fully understand if you are unable to do so and have to say no, as I know you are quite busy. However, I would have regretted it if I had never at least asked. You have over 1,000 episodes on Robservations, but to quote Rocky from Project Hail Mary, is not enough. May you live to do 5,000, good sir. Wishing you and yours health, happiness, awe, and wonder every day, and here's hoping for a kick-ass summer movie season. Sincerely, Corey Van Castle Cook. Dude, come on, man. I'll be on your show. You name it. You set the time. You set the place. Let's do it. We'll probably end up talking for 10 hours. We'll have to do multiple part stories. Yes, the short answer is anytime, any place. Let's do it. Here's to you. And you flatter me. Thank you for the kind words. I very much appreciate that. But of course, I mean, isn't that what this is all about? I mean, that's all. The whole point of this channel is to make it like going to a convention. So we're all friends here. You know, we're all doing panel discussions about what we love. So let's do it. You tell me when, I'll be there. I will be there. This one comes from Evan Newman. Dear Rob, it's been a very long time since I've written in, and that length of time has resulted in a very long letter, apparently, so feel free to cut this down as needed if you choose to read it on the air. But I wanted to answer your call for letters related to your review of Obsession and your discussion with Alvaro regarding Back Rooms. My views on both of these films seem to be in opposition to yours, but we did appear to have common ground about Hokum, although I think I liked that one more than you did. May 2026 was a hell of a month for the horror genre at the box office. Hokum kicked off the month with what I found to be a surprisingly unnerving film. I had plans to go to the grocery store after seeing it, and I'm glad I did. My body's nervous system needed a few minutes to just wander the aisles while coming down after seeing that film. Over time, I've come to love the horror genre more and more, and as a result, I watch horror movies quite a bit. So I say I was surprisingly unnerved by Hokum because I think the last time I felt any sort of lasting effect after watching a horror movie was nearly a decade ago after seeing 2018's Hereditary. The effect those films had on me was not identical, however. Hereditary was a rather disturbing and blood-soaked film in the end, whereas Hokum was more like experiencing someone else's nightmare. In fact, I also found it to be quite dreamy, particularly the hospital scene with the bellboy at the end, a la the ending Kubrick deleted from The Shining. A few weeks after seeing Hokum, Obsession hit theaters, and while I didn't feel any lasting impact from this film, I did quite enjoy the ride it took me on. Anyone who's been in a relationship or had a crush can identify with getting exactly what you wish for and getting it hard. I certainly can. I found myself almost looking away in certain parts because of how terrified I was of what the wish-possessed Nikki might do next. You're not wrong. Lastly, not 24 hours ago, I got out of seeing Back Rooms, and I was left underwhelmed. The initial scenes with Clark and then his employees exploring the back rooms were totally engaging for me. Alvaro likening the back rooms to the labyrinth of ancient Greek mythology and the Minotaur being a part of yourself or your life that you dislike or despise was spot on. However, outside of those early exploration scenes, I found myself unable to allow the film to take me over, if you will. When we walk in and sit down in a theater and the movie begins to play, there's always a transitional period we go through between knowing we're watching a movie and letting the movie truly take over our attention. That's a very astute observation, and I think you are correct. Backrooms was frustrating for me because for most of the time I watched it, it almost never had a grasp on me. Or maybe I wasn't able to give myself over to it, as you might say, Rob. This has happened to me in the past. For example, when watching The Dark Knight Rises for the first time and being unable to just go with the film and forget I was in the theater. In both instances, I was very aware the whole time that I was sitting in the theater watching a movie, and I just couldn't get into the movie. Why? Why were Hokum and Obsession able to hold my attention in a way that Backrooms was not? Or why did I give myself over to those first two films and not the third? There could be a number of explanations, but I think the most impactful one for me is expectation. When I decided to go see Hokum, all I knew about it was it was a horror movie. It starred Adam Scott, which I found intriguing. It was being released by Neon, and it was supposed to be good. That's it. That's all I knew about it. So the entire time I was watching the film, I was discovering something new about the movie that I didn't know going into it. I looked up some of the marketing for the film after seeing it, and I was incredibly glad that I hadn't seen any of it. Some of the bizarro nightmare stuff in the film was totally spoiled by the marketing. I know they have to sell the movie, but I'm damn sure glad I avoided it all. I had a similar experience with Obsession. For all I knew about it going in was that it was made by a YouTuber and was being released by Focus Features and Blumhouse. I was surprised to learn after the fact that it had a budget of maybe $1 million. This film, too, was a wonderful and terrifying journey to go on. I hear all of your criticisms, but I think I took it for what it was while I was watching it. A haunted house movie in the form of a relationship, and it worked for me. It was a blast of an amusement park ride, and that's about it. Then, just a day ago, I decided to venture out to see what all the fuss was about, with Backrooms, and I was left underwhelmed. Unfortunately, I think the big marketing push, as well as my background knowledge of the Backrooms meme, hurt the film for me. Because those two things and the massive opening weekend numbers, I let my expectations get ahead of me, and I think that hurt the film for me. You mentioned going into Obsession expecting a masterpiece and being very disappointed. I wasn't very disappointed. I was disappointed. But I liked it. I didn't hate Obsession. It was very, very, very fun to watch. I think I had the same experience with Backrooms. I thought I walked into Backrooms keeping my expectations as low as they were for the first two films, but I realized while watching it that I hadn't been successful. My expectations were much bigger for this film, and my viewing experience seems to have suffered as a result. What do you think about expectations versus outcomes when it comes to movies, particularly these three? I know you're in a different boat than most, given that you can get your hands on most scripts and even some yet-to-be-released films, but do you think that your expectations got the better of you with Obsession? I do, actually. And did mine get the better of me with Backrooms, or is there more going on here? I will say regarding Backrooms that I love the idea of exploring the rooms and discovering what might lurk inside them. And it has a tough-to-pull-off image, if you will, a horrific entity standing before you in plain view. Spoiler, I'm referring to the image of the giant pirate after it's entered the room with the fire extinguisher trap, where the camera goes to a wide shot, holds, and then you realize it's been standing there the whole time. I've had nightmares about such things, and the feeling of being trapped by a giant, horrific entity that you can't possibly fight off, so it's all flight, no fight. Better not let it catch you. So that's a long way of saying there's good stuff in Backrooms, but for the most part, I just struggled to get into it. I also found that the first-person shooter camera angles and movements broke the verisimilitude of the film for me. If you were holding a camera and I were holding a camera, we wouldn't hold or move the camera in the exact same way, even if we were holding the exact same camera. Yet in this film, any character holding the camera holds and moves it in the exact same way, while also treating the camera as a replacement for their eyes. Human beings have peripheral vision even when we're holding a camera or have one strapped to our head. That's actually a very astute observation that I hadn't thought of. The first-person shooter camera shots felt like the filmmakers weren't playing fair with their audience. Compare, for example, how in-universe cameras are used in the original Blair Witch Project, one of my favorite horror movies, with how they're used in Backrooms. In Blair Witch, the cameras feel like cameras. You can just tell a person is holding and using the cameras like a normal person would. In Backrooms, whenever we're looking through the lens of the camera moves as it's supposed to be a POV shot instead of a camera shot, and it just didn't work for me. That's really interesting, actually. And if you think about Kane Pixels, he was creating a virtual background. I mean, the Backrooms, he was doing it virtually and building it in Blender. So his camera was, he was looking at a CG generated space, and it would have been really hard to duplicate the way that human beings held cameras. And I think he carried that thought process forward. I bet if he made the movie after hearing that observation you made, he would do it differently. But because I think he's a little locked into how he'd been making his shorts, that he didn't think of doing that. It's funny because until you brought it up, I didn't think of doing that either. But it's a genius way. You would have been able to say something about the characters in the movie if each person who took a camera did something different with it. That's a very interesting, I love that observation. See, you learn something new every day from people. I understand from your conversation with Alvaro that the two of you found Backrooms to be a masterpiece. I didn't think it was a masterpiece. I thought it was really, really great. A masterpiece, I don't know. But if I may be so bold, sir, much of your conversation focused on the ideas presented in Backrooms and how they tie back to earlier classic films and literature. Yes. Unlike in your review of Obsession, where much of your criticism was centered around the lore and what was happening on screen, your review of Backrooms was focused on the idea of the Backrooms and not so much what actually happened on screen in the film itself. Was it really a good movie, or was the idea behind the movie just a really good idea? Again, these are great questions and great observations you're making here. I really enjoyed your discussion on both Backrooms and your review of Obsession. I just came away feeling differently on both. So, Rob, now that you've had a bit of time to digest Hokum, Obsession, and Backrooms, what is your overall view on the state of horror movies at the cinema today? And which of these three, if any, might people still be talking about after their normal 20-year shelf life is up? That's a reference back to the fact that I've always said pop culture has a half-life of 20 years. My view is that these films, particularly Obsession and Backrooms, show that there's probably a lot more to be mined from filmmakers on YouTube. And of the three, Backrooms will probably have the longest lasting impact, given its ties to long-standing concepts and ideas. I just think it's the least engaging film of the three. Thank you for reading this mouthful of a letter. Apparently I had a lot of pent-up writing that needed to be let out, given how long I've waited between letters. Evan Newman, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Prince's hometown. First of all, this is a great letter. So, Evan, thank you. As somebody who loves the horror genre, I like it when a character, a well-drawn character in the real world stumbles into the supernatural. And I think a lot of people do. Why? Because we relate to that. And the reason I think that Hokum, and especially Obsession, has touched such a nerve is that the viewers put themselves into the movie. Like, when you watch a great horror film, whether you're watching, a movie with a final girl like Halloween, and you're being chased by a psycho killer, you as an audience member put yourself into the film. You're identifying with the protagonist. Laurie Strode is you. Ashley Lawrence in Hellraiser is you, or whatever. And the thing is, the more that we can relate to what the characters are going through, like, hey man, this guy just went to go to this hotel in Hokum and didn't know that he was going to stumble into the supernatural. And the supernatural is still, even though it's supernatural, it's interacting with the real world that this character is in. So I think it's much more identifiable, and the audience can identify much more when the supernatural shenanigans start happening. Curry Barker has said that Hereditary is one of the most impactful horror movies he's ever seen, because he's only 26, right? That movie, again, is set in the real world, and the real world. And I think Obsession, the thing about Obsession is everybody relates to it, even though, yes, you have the One Wish Willow conceit. It's still, we all get it. What happens when somebody that we're interested in goes fucking nuts? Everybody can relate to that, and what happens is, like, if a pet dies, and your significant other who is crazy about you digs up the pet, cuts it up, cooks it up, and serves it to you in a sandwich, this is far more horrifying than a Walking Dead zombie. Now, I love zombie movies, but if a girl that I was interested in, that I craved, that we'd slept together, served up my former pet in a sandwich to me, I don't know if I could ever get over that. So those things are much more relatable than, say, the Back Rooms. So much of the Back Rooms in its conceit is intellectual concepts. The whole idea of the Back Rooms is an intellectual idea. It has no bearing, while we understand that, okay, it's a representation of these soul-crushing 9-to-5 jobs that many Americans can find themselves in, or many people can, sitting in cubicles for the rest of your life. That's still all intellectual. The backrooms aren't real. So we can understand it as a fantasy realm, but we don't relate to it nearly as much as you relate to what's going on with Obsession, because that shit can happen. And same with Hokum. The ghosts and things, like we understand the demarcation points, but if you go too far into the fantasy realm or the science fiction realm, Backrooms has nothing. There's nothing really analogous. It's metaphorical, and it's fantastical. So there's a lot of people, you can watch it and be intellectually stimulated, but you're not internalizing it the way you internalize Obsession. And that's what I would say is the difference. And for me, as a reader, a lot of the time I've read science fiction and fantasy and horror novels that deal with intellectual conceits, and they take me to places that clearly aren't real. And the more fantastical things become, the more I'm less scared of them. My intellect is more engaged than my fight or flight or fear response. So the thing about Backrooms is I see Backrooms more as a science fiction film than anything else. Like, you've fallen into an alternate realm and you start thinking to yourself existentially, well, what does this mean? And the visceral horror is not necessarily there. Although I do find what happens to people in the Backrooms pretty viscerally horrible. Body horror or whatever. But I think that's exactly it. They're far more. What you said about Backrooms is I totally understand that. Hokum is the story of a real person, and you can see yourself. And same with we are all of us Bear, and we that's why I think we relate better to that kind of thing. And one of the things, like, I'm a big fan of producer Roy Lee. And Roy Lee he was a producer on Hokum. And I know Roy a little bit, and I've kind of come to understand his taste. And his taste is very much more along the lines of the Hookums of the world. He might make A Boy Kills World and do something like that, but his taste in horror, like he pretty much found, Zach Kreger, and who came out of comedy, and another director who came making YouTube videos or comedy sketches, but Barbarian is set in the real world. Weapons, even though there's a fantastical part of it, set in the real world. And if you want to bring, like Roy Lee's movies, he's not so interested in vampires or werewolves or that fantastical element. He likes things that are much more set in the horrors of the real world. And I totally get why. Because, the further you go out away from the real world, the further you go into the fantasy and science fiction realm, things change and there's less of the visceral nature of what real horror can do. And there's a simplicity to horror, that kind of horror. And Backrooms is not that. And Backrooms, the very idea of the Backrooms, if you're not willing to buy into it, I'm sure I've talked to a lot of people that are like, I don't get it. I don't get what the Backrooms is. And I'm like, well, the Backrooms it's a science fiction fantasy thing as much as it is a horror thing. So I think that you're not wrong about all this. Now, let me see what if you guys have had super chats or anything. I haven't even looked, and there's a lot of people with super chats. Let's see, shout section. Let me see if I can get down here and read what people are saying. So shout section says, I think I got that right. Hang on, let me just look here. Shout section Big Band says, hey Rob, sent you a big Star Trek letter back in February or March. It has some good parts. If you see fit to use it, I can resend it. Yeah, I guess I haven't seen that. So I don't know. And shout section Big Band also says you're going to need a bigger attention span. So resend it. I don't know if I lost it. Jurgen POS or Post. Jurgen Post says, I recommended Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, to a 31-year-old gentleman once. He found it boring and was wondering if it was due to the lack of CG. He left me the same way as the film did on my first viewing, which was speechless. Yeah, I mean, look, The Road Warrior blew my mind when I saw it. It opened in 81, but in the U.S. it opened in the summer of 82, early in the summer of 82. Blew my mind. The Road Warrior still to this day is one of the most incredible things ever. But when you've seen as much as we've seen now, you go back and you watch the Road Warrior to understand it was all done practically. It's amazing, but again, a lot of people just don't know that. They haven't experienced it. Joe the Lawyer says, the great art you are talking about is great because it touches the soul, the little bit of the universal soul that we all share. I totally agree with that. It's a part of being human that we don't understand. That's a part of all of us that is instilled in us through existence. And but it does have to be cultivated. I think you do have to get into it. But I totally agree with you. Warren says, any thoughts on Stargate being canceled? I'm rewatching, and season 1 and season 8 have banger episodes. This was a great TV show. That was a blank spot in my education. I still haven't watched nearly enough of Stargate, but I did start watching the first season. I quite enjoyed it. So for those of you who aren't following, they were developing a new Stargate series with one of the original creators of the TV show, and then Amazon decided not to move forward with it. Now, I kind of thought that would happen, but we don't really know why. There's lots of, maybe they didn't agree. Look, I think that there is a certain thought process. If you're trying to peddle a well-known IP that has literally hundreds of episodes, which is what the Stargate franchise has, and you're trying to talk to somebody who's never watched Stargate, and all they're thinking is, can't you instill this with more modern concerns? I totally get it. But to buy into Stargate is to buy into Stargate. You don't buy into it and say, well, can't you make this have more broad appeal? Well, what does that even mean? You don't even know what that broad appeal is. And coming back with a new Stargate series, look, I don't think people want more of the same. You got to come back with something new, something that is giving you something different. But Stargate has so much there. If you don't do it, you wind up with the entire Kurtzman era of Star Trek. You wind up with the original series Light in Strange New Worlds, which is Strange New Worlds is a show that is based on the pop culture sense memory of what everyone thinks the original series was. Because there's an element to it that it's not totally sincere. Star Trek Discovery tried to be very sincere, but didn't understand Star Trek at all. Then you have Lower Decks, which is a comedy for people who like Star Trek. You know, Captain Picard was all over the place till the third season, where it became Next Generation Season 8, and that became interesting. But if you don't know these IPs, you shouldn't be working in them. And if you're an executive, you can't tell somebody who's worked on hundreds of episodes of an IP to come in and, can you have it, make it have more broad appeal? Oh, you mean the hundreds of episodes that they created before wasn't broad enough? But I understand where they're coming from. But it's too bad it didn't happen. But then again, you know, it's not like they greenlit the show. They greenlit the development of it, but clearly they were always at an impasse of what it was supposed to be. Kenny Colton, what's up, dude? My yellow hazmat backrooms 3D printed popcorn bucket is almost finished. Plus an Async Research Institute, Captain Clark's furniture store shirt, and some wallpaper. Almost time to no clip, Bob. Well, I love that. I love that for you, Kenny. And I've been thinking about. I'm waiting. I would love to no clip out of reality into the back rooms. I'd be into it. Austrian Stories said, buy a pack of Pall Mall Select Blues, or send Bob $5. Also, Return of the Jedi's for kids, and I sure loved it as a kid. You are right. You should go buy some Pall Mall Select Blues, man. I firmly. I'm down with that. I'm down with that. Mario from Portugal, who's been a member of the channel for 62 months. Mario, where have you been? First of all, how's your mom been? And how are you, my friend? It's good to see you, and thanks for being a member of the channel. Hopefully, we'll have a membership call this week, a member call. 200 Watt Studio says, we got you, man. We get it, Rob. We all have a sense memory of something good happening. Yes. I was tearing up, man. That was wild. Marco Esquindola says, I love Star Trek the Motion Picture the best, but I love all films with the OG cast. Yep. Amazing. Royston Bailey asks, this is for an episode of Next Generation Darmok, was the alien Captain Dathon in Darmok right to risk his and Picard's lives to create linguistic communication between them? Yes. I mean, otherwise, wouldn't they have both been killed by that entity? I mean, it could have happened. You never know. I mean, you never know what could have happened. So I would say that he wasn't wrong. Darth Plato sends in a tip and says, to say a movie is boring says nothing about the movie, but plenty about the complainer. It says something about you. Boring is not an objective critique. If a movie isn't for you, then fair enough, but just say that. Yeah, I don't trust people that say boring. Even though I've said boring before, but I don't tend to dig people that say boring. So I don't. But I agree with you, Darth. I do agree with you. Now, let's see. What do I have? Should I read the marquee letter? Should I read the marquee letter? Today's marquee letter. Okay, I'm going to do that because our friend Cameron Mitchell, here comes the big headline letter. Cameron Mitchell, hey, he wrote that article where I had that very visceral reaction when he said Jaws was boring, but he's doubled down. And Cameron Mitchell, which is very funny if you know your film history, but Cameron Mitchell has written in again. to talk with Spielberg, talk about Spielberg on the week that Disclosure Day opens. And so Cameron Mitchell, who describes himself as a Gen Z imagination connoisseur, whose family's in the exhibition business, has written another letter. Cameron writes, Robservations, is Jaws boring? Strap in, folks. Here we go. I feel like I got too emotional in my last letter. I gave you the high ground to slice me to shreds like Anakin. But you let me down easy, which I appreciate. While I still believe what I said was true, I could have delivered the message more tactfully. I think Steven Spielberg is one of the great filmmakers of all time. And I think Jurassic Park is a masterpiece. Well, that's because you're Gen Z. However, there is a reason Curry Baker and Kane Parsons can capture the zeitgeist today, while Disclosure Day cannot, even with its massive budget. Most people don't care what a 79-year-old billionaire has to say. He is the antithesis of what resonates with today's youth. Older audiences may see that as disrespectful, but Gen X did the same thing to Westerns, gravitating toward young filmmakers like Spielberg while letting the old genre decay. As a nihilistic detective once said, time is a flat circle. I decided to atone for my movie sins from my last letter by watching Jaws the old-fashioned way. I went to a physical store, bought a physical copy of Jaws, came home, put my phone in another room, and gave the movie 2 hours of my full attention. I have given this movie the respect it deserves. So while I'm still going to tell you why Jaws is boring, I am not going to poke the bear. But I believe my perspective is important for understanding how films change as culture changes. To start the dive into Jaws, I believe my experience is best summarized by a quote. Good artists borrow, great artists steal, and pop culture cannibalizes. Now, that's a Pablo Picasso quote popularized by Steve Jobs, and I added the last bit. Today's directors, actors, stories, and even blockbuster formulas were influenced by older films and artists. The past shaped the language of cinema today. The question we don't ask is, but at what cost to the past? The classics created the blueprint. Future generations took those films and copied, refined, modernized, or sadly desecrated them to elevate their work. When new generations watch the current iterations, they aren't just seeing the shoulders that are supporting the current work. The dolly zoom in Jaws is one of the most famous shots in cinema, but it was first used in Hitchcock's film Vertigo. Spielberg's underwater POV shots with the shark are iconic, but were first used in The Creature of the Black Lagoon. When you bring up those techniques, the examples are often from Jaws. I believe Spielberg enhanced those techniques, but I also feel like he absorbed the past. Today, the dolly zoom and the POV of the killer are commonly used by filmmakers. To the point, it does not create the same reaction as it did for past generations. This is how pop culture cannibalizes. It takes what you love and uses it till it's in the ground and the allure is gone. Jaws is so influential in cinema that the movie has become a trope. Filmmakers have stolen every last morsel of that movie to the point that nothing on the screen feels new. I want to acknowledge that I don't think tropes are inherently bad. They're tropes because they work. However, when you have too many tropes, the story becomes bland. I believe that Jaws has been absorbed by pop culture. Even the structure of Jaws does not feel as fresh. It is a horror thriller in the first half and an action adventure in the second. I think genre blending is cool, and I assume it was a newer concept at the time, but now audiences are much more accustomed to it, and we have lots of great examples. Predator famously switches from an action movie to a horror film, or Alien from sci-fi adventure to horror. In the opening title shot, you get a sexually promiscuous woman who dies immediately. one of the biggest tropes in horror. Her death does not look realistic. The way she gets pulled under the water and dragged around is not at all how a shark attack looks. Spielberg was young, and the budget was modest, and you can tell in the film because it is not very polished. For his age and the time, what he did was impressive. He's the same age as Curry Baker was when he made Obsession. Spielberg was 26 when he started making Jaws. He was 28 when the movie came out, but he was 26 when he started shooting it. Just saying. The film's greatest strength is the way Spielberg builds suspense and tension, but you get distracted by how dated it all feels. In the first half of the story, the main characters warns authorities that they are in danger, but the greedy businessman government covers it up because of a major event leading to further tragedy. The number of iterations of caring about money over safety is laughable. The second half of the story is a man hunting something larger than himself. It is an underdog story of a man beating the odds with grit, which is merely spectacle-driven. In the story in general is thin. Brody is the everyman the audience is supposed to relate to. He is an outsider with a fear of water that he will obviously overcome by the end of the movie. Hooper is the book-smart Ivy League character whose hubris will lead him to almost dying. Quint is the blue-collar and most experienced. His character starts out as a crazy obsessed fisherman, but once you learn his backstory, you sympathize with him. You know where the story is going from the very beginning, and you know how the characters are going to evolve. At the end of the day, it's a popcorn film, so there's no core message that stands the test of time or is thematically rich that makes you think about it the next day. What's left is the spectacle. Pop culture has borrowed every ounce of spectacle from this film. From the music, the beach scene, the USS Indianapolis monologue, to the battle with the monster, to the end explosion. I've seen this film through other films. Just this past year, the new Anaconda movie with Jack Black, the Anaconda handler, was a direct ripoff of Quint, and Jurassic World Rebirth had a scene that was a direct homage to the barrel scene in Jaws. It's been 50 years and they're still stealing from the movie. Besides Jaws' horrible sequels, they also have a plethora of knockoff movies that never elevate from the original, but solely take from it. Think about how many homages and parodies there have been. Watching Jaws today is such a different experience than watching it when it came out. I have a personal story that encapsulates how pop culture changes classics. I was living with my ex-girlfriend at the time, and we were fighting over what to watch for the night. She wanted to watch her TV show, and I had a strong urge to watch 2001: A Space Odyssey. I made a deal with her to give the film 10 minutes, and if it was boring, we'd watch her show. The opening shot of the planet alignment comes on the screen, and you hear Strauss's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and she exclaimed, "This is the most generic space music, turn it off." Novelty wears off in time, especially horror. They turn horror into pop culture icons. Jaws is an amusement park ride. Dracula is on a cereal box. Leatherface is a Fortnite skin. Michael Myers is an internet challenge. And Chucky is a soda flavor. You can now wear these serial killers on your shirt or buy their Funko Pop. They turn monsters into mascots. But what's the cherry on top is the sequels. A character or story cannot merely end. They have to be dug up from their grave and electrocuted back to life, like Frankenstein's monster. Ironically, the monster started being called Frankenstein from the sequel, and subsequent installments have turned the frightening, tragic figure into a family-friendly icon. This is a perfect representation of how sequels change the characters and stories. Sequels are inherently cash grabs. They are made solely to make more money. They are uninspired, and generally rushed to get made. There are exceptions to the rule, but for every good sequel that gets made, that creates even more installments. Far worse. Terminator 2 is followed up by 4 more god-awful movies. Bad sequels do 2 things. They tarnish the original and make it harder for new fans to get into the franchise. Alien 3 ruins Aliens. My first Indiana Jones movie I watched was Crystal Skull when I was a kid. My first experience with the Indiana Jones series was horrible. Later in life, I watched Raiders and Temple of Doom, which I quite liked, but the bad taste from Crystal Skull still lingers. The Scream franchise has become the very movie that the original Scream satirized. For many teenagers today, Scream 7 was the first time watching a Scream movie. Do you think that makes them more or less likely to dive into the franchise? Also, if they do seek out the past installments, the only watchable Scream movies are the first two. The rest were made to sell Halloween costumes. Sequels are also made for fans of the previous films. Legacy characters, callbacks, nostalgia baits, and fan service are all things that isolate and confuse newcomers to the franchise. The Star Wars sequel trilogy is a masterclass in how not to do a sequel. It ruined the legacy characters. Han Solo dies in a cheap way and Luke Skywalker is mischaracterized. Palpatine somehow returns, which undermines the original trilogy, so older fans hate it. All the while, they don't give the new characters enough time to develop. Finn and Poe's character arcs are pushed to the side. Rey is not given enough time to grow as a character, and Kylo and Rey's romance is shoehorned in at the end. On top of a horrible story, it left outsiders to the franchise with no one to latch on to. Hollywood also makes my favorite slop movie, a children's movie for adults. Corporate brain finds IP that was popular for kids in the past and makes it for kids today, not knowing that kids today don't care for it, so you end up having an audience of adults watching a kid's movie. The Masters of the Universe movie still leans into its campy, exaggerated roots instead of evolving for an older audience. While trying to appeal to kids with a 2.5-hour movie filled with nostalgia for a cartoon they didn't watch and sprinkled with sexual innuendos throughout. It alienates both audiences instead of capturing one. I went to the Mandalorian and Grogu screening on opening night, and I was the youngest person there. It was full of Gen X. We all collectively watched a movie where nothing happens. No lessons are learned. No moral dilemma, no character growth. Which is okay for a kid's movie if there was stuff that attracts children's interests, but the hook for watching the movie was purely nostalgia bait. Remember Boba Fett? Remember Yoda? Remember Jabba the Hutt? Remember Sigourney Weaver? Remember the AT-AT? Remember the X-Wing? Remember the chessboard? Kids don't care for nostalgia that they don't even have. So you're left with a bad movie for kids and an uninteresting movie for adults. What George Lucas and Steven Spielberg got right is that they made adult movies for kids. The youth want their Spielberg for their time. They want art that reflects them and their interests. Studio heads say their job is to make money and limit risk, but Spielberg and Lucas made all the money, so why aren't they investing in future auteurs? If you swapped Kane Parsons for a seasoned director and tripled the budget, Backrooms would not have done as well as it did. Hollywood today is trying to force old IP and filmmakers down the youth's throat and wonders why a new generation is not rushing out to the theater. When movies solely become about captivating and stimulating without genuine meaning, what does it leave you feeling? There's no greater work that describes that feeling than the film La Dolce Vita. The film has you sprawling through Rome, seeing the extravagant nightlife and meeting beautiful actresses, yet the whole time, Marcello, the main character, feels empty and directionless. Everything is a spectacle with no deep connections. The lifestyle attracts attention, money, and beauty, but no real substance. The decay and melancholy slowly rise as you watch the film. By the end, the dread is palpable and hard to watch as a viewer. I feel this is a representation of the movie industry. Sequels and franchises make money, and it is what gets people to the movie theater, but how long can it last? The illusion has been fading for a while, especially among the younger generations, because they don't hold as much nostalgia for older franchises. The older generation is waking up to it as the quality of their favorite IPs like Star Trek and Star Wars declines. They're trying to continue the party, but the franchises feel lifeless and hollow. The last scene of the movie is a giant dead sea creature washed ashore. It's a spectacle that garners attention, but the feeling it elicits is grotesque. Marcello then notices a young girl in the distance trying to say something to him. He must walk over to her to hear what she's saying. Will the movie industry decide to walk over to young filmmakers making original work, or will they stay next to the decaying spectacle? Only time will tell. Best regards from a Gen Z imagination connoisseur, Cameron Mitchell. Well, that's a great letter, Cameron. A great letter. I have much to say about it. But first of all, just because the world has memed and pulled tropes and copied these things over and over again, and you've seen them now a million times, doesn't mean that the original has lost any of its power as a piece of entertainment or a piece of cinema. It's incumbent upon you as an astute viewer to try and put yourself in the headspace of when the film first came out. Now, you could say, well, it's hard to do that. But I would say, well, if you can't do that, you'll never understand why the movie was great. Everything you said about Jaws, you could say is true, but you sit down and you talk about Jaws being boring. I would say it's boring because you've already anticipated everything that's going to happen in the movie. You're not really watching the film. You're watching or you're experiencing the tropes. You're going, oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. You're thinking about the low budget nature. I totally reject all of those things, because it's not like it was a movie made for a totally low budget, because it was based on a huge novel. Now, I agree. You can't go back and watch a movie that's 51 years old. It's more than half a century old. And sit there, and especially you, or I think you said you were 26, and you can't be expected to go back and watch Jaws. But what I can expect you to do is, as a film fan and as a person who comes from a family who has movie theaters, who's in exhibition, I would expect you to be in the right mindset. You have to put yourself in the right mindset to watch Jaws as if you're watching it for the first time and you haven't had the last 50 years of everything that was influenced by it come out, because you're not giving the film a fair shake. And the thing about Jaws is exciting because of its story and because of its classical nature, because you have these two parts of the movie. You have the horror part of it, the adventure part of it, and these disparate characters. I mean, I would go back and say that those characters go all the way back to ancient Greece and mythology. I mean, are you going to tell me that the Odyssey is full of tropes? You know, it's not about the story tropes, because story tropes go back sometimes thousands of years. It's about how a story is told. It's about language. And Spielberg is a master of cinematic language. And, you know, if you're only looking for one thing, I mean, I understand where you're coming from. But I have to tell you that having seen Jaws probably 100 times, most recently in the theater for its 50th anniversary last year, I was actually shocked at how well it still works. And I've seen it probably way more times than you have. And I've never, ever, ever thought that Jaws was boring. Because, yeah, are you watching the beginnings of Steven Spielberg, the filmmaker, one of the most gifted populist artists who's ever lived, whose command of cinematic language is amazing? Look, you can also say that explosive decompression would not have happened if that air tank was shot, and the shark Bruce would not have blown up at the end of the movie. That would not have happened. That's totally fiction. But as Spielberg said famously, if they've gone with me on the ride till the end of the movie, I will make them believe in that. And so he does. Now, you can say, because special effects technology has progressed, you know, are you one of the people that, I mean, I know La Dolce Vita. Here's what I find really interesting about what you're saying. You're using La Dolce Vita as you're holding it up to being this incredible film. And it truly is. It is a fantastic movie. But you know what about that movie? You know why it's different from Jaws? Because no one today has fucking seen it. And our culture hasn't embraced it. It's a very famous foreign film. You know, one of the great Italian movies ever made. But most Americans never saw it. And it's not the kind of movie that has storytelling tropes, because it doesn't rely on storytelling tropes. It relies on different kinds of storytelling. And the reason that I think you love it so much, and I do too, is it's because it's not like any other movie. You know, the influx of foreign cinema, La Dolce Vita was something that broke through. But, you know, I think about my beloved Ennui trilogy. That I think that Backrooms has actually more akin to, or Last Year at Marienbad. Nobody's seen these fucking movies. I mean, people that watch this channel might have, but there is no pop culture sense memory of La Dolce Vita. You could probably go ask 100 people that you know if anybody's ever heard of it. Probably not. L'Avventura, The Eclipse, La Notte, L'Avventura and The Eclipse, the Ennui trilogy from Michelangelo Antonioni. No. We live in a world where people can't differentiate between the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. And to ask them if whether or not they've seen La Dolce Vita, the answer is no. And the fact that Thus Spoke Zarathustra is something that I would say this. When I was younger, my attitude toward watching movies was to sit down and try and understand them from whence they came. And, people won't even watch black and white movies because they're old. Well, from when I was a kid, the idea of not watching classic Universal monster movies because they were black and white never even entered my mind. Frankenstein, when I first saw Frankenstein as a little kid, it scared me, especially the arm part, because when I watched it, I didn't go in with an expectation that I knew more than the movie did. Nowadays, respectfully, the letter you wrote, you're talking to me about tropes. It's like you're in college, like in a literature class. Why are you even thinking about tropes? Why aren't you sitting down and allowing a movie to unfold for you and let it flow over you, rather than sit there and go, there's this trope, there's that trope? I mean, I know it's hard. It's very hard to get anybody to watch any of these movies anymore and take them seriously. But that is a problem. It's a problem that it's incumbent upon you to overcome. It's easy to say these are tropes. It's easy to sit there and go, well, I saw that here, I saw that there, do you see? What you're not doing is the hard part, and the real work is to sit down and watch a movie and watch it on its own terms. You can sit there and go, oh, there is cinematic language that's employed through all movies. I mean, the point of view of the shark, you're astute to say, well, yeah, they did the same thing in Creature from the Black Lagoon. Yes, and filmmakers are utilizing the language of cinema that is being constantly rewritten all the time. But, to say Jaws is boring says more about you than it does about the movie itself. Because I'm here to tell you, and it's a difference of opinion, that Jaws isn't boring at all. But the reasons you're citing for it being boring is that it's because it's been borrowed from to death. Well, that doesn't... You go back and you watch the original and let Spielberg show you how it's done. Now, I'm not saying you have to like Jaws, but the problem is history has already judged Jaws. And it sounds a little silly, and you lose a little bit of credibility when you say that Jaws is boring. Now, I understand why you're going to say that, and you're not wrong. Now, we'll get to the other part of what you were saying about how, yeah, there aren't a lot of films today that appeal to younger people because, one, the entire film business, first of all, has changed. And in order to get a populist film out there into the marketplace is next to impossible because of how much all this now costs. You used to be able to make a movie on a shoestring budget and show it in a theater and at a drive-in and people would see it. The whole economics of the movie business have changed. And one of the reasons being is that they don't understand, people today don't even understand, like, the thing that's happened with these two movies, with both Backrooms and Obsession, is the current movie business, which is driven by larger and larger corporations and their needs, they don't think, and they haven't tried to cultivate an environment where low-budget filmmaking could be viable. I mean, it's also, like I was saying the other day, even the studios can't figure out a way to make a $5 million film, like a genre division that makes $5 million movies, under their system, because they have to make... Everything has to be done union. The studios can't make non-union movies, and even making a $5 million movie for the studios is really difficult now. And how do they avail themselves? The only way they can get low-budget indie films is if they acquire movies like this that are made by independent filmmakers, and they show at festivals and they can go buy them. They can't even make them. The studios can't make movies that cheap that are all union because it's expensive, so they can't do that. So the question that has to be asked, it isn't just because now everyone's looking for, you think filmmakers Spielberg started making Super 8 movies when he was a kid, showing them to his friends. That's how he cut his teeth. Well, using YouTube and putting out your work on YouTube this is not something that should be astonishing to people. There's filmmaking going on every day, all over the internet. The thing is, in the case of Kane Pixels, he ran with this meme and created, being a fan, obviously, he watched Lost when he was younger, which is the Lost videos were hugely influential on what he wanted to do with async and the whole backrooms thing and the mythology, which is great, because he was the only person that created this mythology that endured to the point where some development executive or some assistant saw it and said, hey, there's something here, why don't we take a look at it, see if we can make it into a movie. And indeed they did. Now, the thing about the Backrooms franchise and the thing about Markiplier's Iron Lung and the thing about everybody else is when you have an audience out there that you've cultivated on YouTube, that audience is something that's new. It's the audience that's new. It's the audience that YouTubers bring with them. When millions and millions of people have watched your Backrooms short movies and they know what you've done, those millions and millions and millions of people will turn out and see what you've done and show up to see Backrooms. Now, the thing about Obsession is I maintain that, yes, it was made by a YouTuber, and yes, it was very effective. But the thing about Obsession that caught on so much is it's a zeitgeist movie that captures the larger issues that are happening in the Gen Z space right now. No dating. You can't get a girl. All the anxiety that goes along with that. It's a movie that came along in previous decades. I would say something like Fatal Attraction captured that same zeitgeist. And again, about a man who does something bad, something selfish, and it backfires on him and a woman goes insane because he did something that caused her to go insane. So, these are again classic trope stories that you can reuse over and over again that new generations come and find. But, if you were to go back and watch Fatal Attraction, you could say, okay, this movie's so 80s, or you can try and think to yourself, all right, let's go back and clean the slate. Let's try and watch this movie, everything about this movie, the music cues, the editing, the color timing, the attitudes. It's incumbent on you to clear your mind, Quaid. Clear your mind. And watch a film on its own terms. I know it's hard. You have to train yourself to do it. But in this day and age, when everything has been memed and pop culture has been mined and everything has been spun around and redressed and remixed and recreated, and it's up to us to train ourselves to go back and look at something for what it is, not what it's become. And what it's become is something not what it started out being. Jaws changed the Hollywood landscape. When it came out, it was ginormous. It was a monstrous hit. I mean, at the same time, a couple years before, The Exorcist came out. That was also a monster hit. The Godfather was a monster hit. Now, these were movies that captured everybody's imagination, not just one demographic. I saw Jaws in the theater when I was 8. And I didn't see it until it had been out for like 6 months. And it was insane. I loved every minute of it. But I was 8 when I saw it in the theater. Now, I don't think you're wrong with anything that you're saying. But you can't blame a movie. You can't call a movie boring now that's 51 years old. It's the same way that people won't. And look, I understand your love of La Dolce Vita. There's nothing analogous to it today, and you never would have something analogous to it today because it's got a sensibility from a different country with a much bigger history, a longer history than we have, and different concerns. And even the way Europeans are going about their days are very different from American concerns. They have a very different history than us. And Those movies are more existential, and the attitudes towards cinema as an art form are very different in Europe, so they're able to do all kinds of different kinds of movies. Movies that you could never make in the United States. Never. I mean, you could never make a Tarkovsky movie. You could never make a Bela Tarr movie. You could never make a Ozu movie here in the States. I mean, you could try, but the reason those movies get made is because the countries they're in are different than the United States, and God bless them for that very thing. So, look, obviously you're a very smart kid. And I say kid, I know you're in your 20s, but I think that rather than worry about tropes and think about all this, cast all that aside. Clear your mind. And when you have an opportunity to sit down and watch a classic film, don't put your arms up like this. Sit down, take a deep breath, lean forward, and try and allow that to wash over you and see what it can do. Surrender yourself to the power of that movie. And I can tell you, when I talk about this a lot, but when I went to USC and I took Drew Casper's Cinema 190 class, and I did get to see movies, when I saw Singing in the Rain, and I saw All About Eve, and I saw Nashville for the first time on the big screen. All About Eve was not a movie that I was expecting much from. I had no real sense of it at all, because I'd only seen the picture where the four of them with the interlocking, they're skipping down the street. Boy, what a joy it was to see that film for the first time. I was blown away by All About Eve. I had no idea it was about a horribly evil, manipulative woman. It was about a lot of other things too, but I didn't even know that was a part of it, that there was one of the great villainesses in cinema history in that movie. That, I ended up meeting people like her in real life, working in Hollywood. It's fantastic. But that's all I would say. That's all I would suggest to you, is it's a skill. And look, we have to deal with the fact that we live in a very uncurious, the youth of this country, and I put you square in that demographic, your Gen X generation, you have no interest in being curious about anything other than yourselves. And I will be highly critical. This isn't always true, because you see a lot of people on YouTube going back and doing reaction channels and watching movies, a few of you. But for the most part, I've never seen a bunch of navel-gazing, self-centered narcissists in my life. And I say that with love. Rather than reflecting back on yourselves, you got to be curious. Ted Lasso that shit. Go out into the world and forget about yourself. Forget about what you know. Forget about what you think you know. You've got to approach, and especially if you're going to go delve into cinematic history, go into those movies and try and understand what made them what they are. Try and understand them for what they are when they were made. I've talked to people, horror fans, that watch Suspiria, and they're like, I hated that movie. What was with the soundtrack? And what's with all the colors? Why is the blood so red? I hated it. I get it, man. I get it. Because you only grew up watching a certain thing, and you expect it a certain way, and if you're moving outside your comfort zone, it becomes like, and I also know it's hard to watch older movies. It's hard. I mean, I was lucky in that I was trained to do it because I was watching things in black and white and old movies and crazy, cheesy movies or whatever, because that's all that was on TV. So I learned. I learned the skill of being able to watch things. And as I've liked, if you go back and you read my new Lionsgate Limited editorial about The Arrival, David Tui's The Arrival, I talk about what I mean by watching movies at scale. And I think watching movies at scale is understanding what they are trying to do and what they actually are, and watching them and appreciating them at that level. But anyway, I want to thank you for writing in some banger letters. And you might have annoyed me, but clearly you're a smart, thoughtful person, and you truly love cinema. Hey, anybody that is your age watching La Dolce Vita, you're okay in my book. But I would just say, when you tell me in a letter that Steven Spielberg doesn't matter because he's an old billionaire, I would say that I don't know if you've seen enough of his filmography. I would ask, have you watched Empire of the Sun or The Color Purple? Maybe you haven't. I don't know. But Steven Spielberg is a master of cinematic language, especially of blocking. Have you watched AI that was developed by, of course, Kubrick? Have you watched Lincoln? I mean, Spielberg has a very diverse filmography that is astonishing. He is truly one of the greatest master craftsmen who's ever made movies. And I understand that there are tropes now, but there's no tropes about Empire of the Sun. I'll tell you that. And it can be a little over the top, a little bombastic, a little didactic, but Empire of the Sun's a wonderful film. Based on a book by J.G. Ballard that's actually autobiographical. And so, as a film fan, I would say you're going to have a lot more fun in life if you stay open-minded. And rather than think about, I get it. We live in that meme world where everything is a meme now. But, when you go see Disclosure Day, don't think about it in terms of how it's going to relate back to Gen Z, because Gen Z can't relate to fuck all anyway. They can relate to Obsession because they put themselves in the movie. Backrooms, they've been able to, Kane Pixels is a known commodity on YouTube. They have to know something. But I would just say that you're smarter than that, and you have more going on. So, anyway, let's see. That was a great letter, though. I want to thank you for writing in. 200 Watt Studio says, modern viewers will never understand how beautiful and gratifying to longtime fans to see that 5-minute Enterprise flyby. Yeah, absolutely. And the music's gorgeous, too. The funny thing about that sequence is it really, if you're a Star Trek fan and you love the Enterprise, it puts you in Kirk's mindset, in his mind frame. That's what you become Captain Kirk, and you're actually having the same experience that a fictional character is having on screen. You're both sharing that experience. It transcends time and space. Royston Bailey says, everyone nowadays should watch TNG to learn what a highly functioning workplace looks like. You got that right. Yeah, totally. 200 Watt Studio says, Lucas used film history in all of his films. Jar Jar Binks is Buster Keaton in The General, for example. He's telling a story using film language. Totally agree. And in a different way than Quentin Tarantino does. Shonen Kaiju says Jaws also borrowed a lot from Gojira. The best filmmakers always borrow from the classics and make the stories their own. You're absolutely right. Because, cinematic language is a language that was literally created in the 20th century. So, yeah. And I think that that is absolutely 100% true. So, let's see. Cinema 13 sends in a tip and says, I now understand why Gen Z has chosen celibacy. Well, that's such an interesting thing. I don't understand that. My primary motivating, one of the things that I loved all the science fiction stuff, but that was kind of, I kept to myself. But one of the great things in my life, the beginning at age 13, when I became sexually active, very sexually active, I didn't have actual intercourse, but very sexually active. There was nothing better than to spend time with my girlfriend and explore each other's physiques. It was incredible. But then again, I didn't have performance anxiety or anything like that. It was just, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was the sensual, artistic. First of all, a woman's body was like art to me anyway. I mean, I'd already, as a movie fan, how can you not love the feminine and the male form for that matter? Seeing very, very handsome men with great bodies was something that I appreciated, but seeing the curvaceous, beautiful women, and I mean, I was, as a Star Trek fan, you look at the women of the beauty standards of the '60s, not the twiggy, but the very feminine, busty, hippie, not hippies, but hips. I loved curvaceous, sensual, beautiful women, and to interact with them in a sensual way where you both are exploring each other's bodies and you're enjoying each other's, what it's like to be touched by another person. You're letting somebody in and they're letting you in, and you're finding out what you each like and how you like to be touched and all that. The only thing that was better than movies was that. But nowadays, because everyone's so visually oriented, I think they're not thinking about the sensuality of it all. They're more worried that somebody's going to, if they do something wrong, they're going to be caught on camera, or somebody's going to make fun of them or whatever. But I mean, it's a biological compulsion, man. Go with it. And but you're right, celibacy, what a bummer. But the thing is, again, you were learning things about yourself and other people when you're interacting in that way. I mean, look, all guys, it's kind of like being on a movie set. I learned from a very young age. Do you know what guys don't know how to do very well? Kiss. They don't know how to kiss. And I heard that. I was always, because I had lots of older friends and I had older babysitters and I was very inquisitive. And I had this babysitter named Debbie Black who showed me that Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, but she would tell me inappropriate stories about guys and things like that. And she would tell me, that was a lesson she imparted to me. She said to me, men don't know how to kiss. And when you're with somebody and you kiss a man for the first time, there's nothing more disappointing than that. Because if a man doesn't know how to kiss, he doesn't know how to do anything else. And that always stuck with me. It was a lesson. And she told me, how does a man not know how to kiss? And she goes, well, you have to start slow. And you can't, you have to build up to it. And I realized, so learning how to kiss is like telling a story. You have to learn how to tell a story, just like you have to learn how to tell a joke. You have to learn how to kiss. You have to learn, you to become a great lover, at least in my experience, is telling a story. But you're not telling the story about yourself. You're telling a story about the person that you're with. I leave that with you to do what you may with that. But anyway, I do have a, let's see. There's a letter here that I would love to read to you. Let me see if I can download it. They sent me an actual letter. I have to download it, but we'll do that. But yes, let's see. Darth Plato says that trope is a word that's meant to be denotative. Denotative nowadays. It's used denotate and connotatively. Try thinking of tropes as a useful catalog of references. Mr. McPlainview says, big fan of Argento Suspiria as a fellow Gen Zer, which is great. Yes, indeed. Now, this is a pretty long letter. It comes from Isaac. It was written on June 4th, and I want to read it. And this will be the last letter I read tonight. Temples, ready for worship. Dear Rob, this month has been an unexpectedly eventful one in the movie world. In April, I looked ahead at the summer schedule and found that the first blockbuster of the season that I was remotely excited for, Disclosure Day, wouldn't be released until mid-June. The realization startled me. I have long associated May as the kickoff for 3 months of seeing new adventures on the big screen. When I was in high school, the MCU was in its prime, so at the very least, I could count on one larger-than-life title to herald the start of the long summer, brought to you by Hollywood. This year, however, none of the big May offerings excited me. The Mandalorian and Grogu was the perfection representation of what Star Wars had settled for, and The Devil Wears Prada 2 and Mortal Kombat 2 were sequels to movies that hadn't interested me in the first place. Was I getting old, or was Hollywood growing stale? If this May saw milquetoast offering of preordained blockbusters, it also saw the return of old school hits. Yes, even though Obsession and Backrooms were made by guys in their 20s, their rightly celebrated success is in fact a throwback. These weren't movies that had blockbuster status handed to them. They earned it, as was the case with most movies throughout most of film history. This is why movies up until the 2010s seem stickier in the popular memory than the movies of recent years. Silence of the Lambs was not a blockbuster until its superb quality endeared it to an audience. Lambs was released in 1991. The highest-grossing film of that year was Terminator 2. Its success may seem obvious until we remember that the original made less than $100 million, meaning the original Terminator. The sequel went above and beyond expectations because of what a modest hit from 1984 had come to mean to audiences in the intervening years. It also helped that Terminator 2 was an expertly crafted action-adventure. This is how a healthy film business should function. Audiences shouldn't be able to look at a calendar and see what companies have decided the upcoming hits will be. Hits should have organic success, tied to the delighted response of viewers caught unawares. Hits should be powered not by dutiful franchise loyalty, but by a ubiquitous sense of, you have to see this. I thought those days were behind us. This month proved me wrong. At a time when the cultural status of movies seems more uncertain than ever before, young people have revealed that actually they like movies quite a lot. They could have stayed home scrolling through short-form videos, or they could have watched something AI-generated. Instead, they went to see stories made by humans. As someone who works in public schools, this is in line with the conversations I overhear all day. Most young people see AI as a negative force. Of course, they're also more adept at using AI and are resigned to its increased presence, but that's just it. They're resigned. They aren't excited. Given the opportunity to see natural movies made by people roughly their age, they've jumped at the opportunity. A certain type of Hollywood has indeed grown stale, but perhaps we're going through another cycle of rebirth, as happened in the 60s and 70s. If that is the case, movies may once again become cultural barometers. That's the good news. The less good news, that having finally seen both movies, I find the broader culture it reflects has the right inclinations, but not enough substance. I'll begin with Obsession. The week before I saw Obsession, I saw two movies that couldn't be more different from each other. 1959's The Diary of Anne Frank and 1986's The Fly. There's a double feature. There's no reason to compare these films, except that after I saw Obsession, I realized that both of these older movies had something the newer one did not. The Diary of Anne Frank has been criticized for giving a tragic true story a Hollywood makeover, and I partially agree. The lead actress is played by 23-year-old beauty, and Richard Beymer gives a terrible dreamboat performance as Peter Van Damme. Yet the movie won me over because it is committed to its themes. If you can look beyond the appearance of the movie, which signals a sensibility we consider out of fashion, the movie is about what it means to maintain your personhood in a world determined to take it away. I feel like that every day now. That's powerful stuff, and the accumulation of Anne Frank's spiritual development ended up moving me deeply by the end. Because the movie nurtured its dramatic meaning, I could forgive a lot of other flaws. The Fly is a much better movie than Anne Frank, and I won't go over a premise I'm sure is very familiar to your listeners. This was the second time I saw the movie, and once again I was struck that despite the horror elements of the story, it is fundamentally a tragic romance. Look past Brundlefly and you'll see a timeless tale about a man's dream of transcending his limits brought to ruin by the facts of his mortal body. The only person who is with him throughout his transformation is a woman both protagonist and audience gradually realizes was the only thing ever worth pursuing. The closing act of the movie is the hardest to sustain because the thrills of the premise have worn off by then. The finale will only work if the movie is about something more than its elevator pitch. That's why The Fly just keeps getting better and better after Brundle's faithful test. It's more than a cool premise. Before I saw Obsession, I would have guessed that The Fly would have a lot more in common with Curry Barker's movie with more... Before I saw Obsession, I would have guessed that The Fly would have a lot more in common with Curry Barker's movie than with Anne Frank. That wasn't the case. The two older movies were about things. Obsession was not. It's just a premise, a riff on a trendy internet topic. And most of the young people I've spoken to have mistaken the potential of that premise for what they actually saw. As you covered earlier this month, the lore behind the One Wish Willow makes no sense, and in consequence, the evil is hard to believe. I completely agree. More disappointing to me, though, was that the movie didn't actually have themes. Great movies must have authority. Yes, as you pointed out, authoritative stories must have worlds the author has thought through, but they also need to be about something more than mere plot. I thought that, like The Fly, Obsession was going to be a tragic, dramatic romance dressed up as a horror movie. I thought the movie was going to examine the relationships between men and women by blending a dramatic story with the situations only its horrific premise could conjure. The movie never did any of this. Instead, it assumed its fairly common wish premise was enough and settled for a crazy possession story that made no sense. Despite my objections, people love the movie. When I ask why, they say that it spoke to current concerns about gender relations, largely in online spaces. If I press them on the movie itself, not its topic, they can't sustain a convincing argument. None of this should surprise us. Obsession had its audience in mind more than its story. Its concerns weren't with its world or its characters, but with how such elements would be received by a Gen Z crowd in a theater. It's like a fishbowl so well decorated you think there are fish inside, but when you look, there are neither fish nor water. Counterintuitively, the best movies don't prioritize the audience. They set the audience aside and work on the story, trusting that if the story is good, the audience will be there. I welcome the return of hits like Obsession, but also worry that it represents a worrisome term for popular art. If movies begin chasing audiences with empty gestures at their online concerns, all that does is reproduce the shallow incoherence of the internet. The very thing cinema should be an antidote to. Sadly, that might not be enough. Obsession is the perfect Gen Z hit because it's made by a filmmaker who understands the horizons of young people are increasingly limited to online discourse. This discourse is largely self-centered, responsive to signs, and ignorant that the signs should be a gateway to meaning. How should movies function? When I was about 12 years old, I saw No Country for Old Men. The movie had nothing to do with me, and that's precisely why I found it hypnotic. I had encountered an adult vision vastly larger than my imaginative and emotional landscape. Its themes were more powerful, its metaphors more sophisticated than I'd known possible. I didn't fully appreciate the movie at 12, but I thirsted for it. Great movies don't speak to me. They speak within themselves. They work as separate realities. I watch them like a man in the desert who approaches an ancient temple that has somehow remained intact without any attendants. Once the man enters, he sees that the statues still look brand new, the candles still burn brightly, and the labyrinthian hallways still lead the way to hidden, forgotten worlds. It is the man's good fortune to come across these structures, the quality of which draws all travelers. Movies shouldn't search for us. They should be too busy being great stories and trust that we will come. Finally, this brings me to Backrooms, which I saw last night. This movie gets it. It isn't chasing an audience. It's too busy being about something. Behind the irresistible horror premise, Backrooms speaks to the unknown country of consciousness. It is about memory and the universe discovering us. It's the first great metaphor for how the internet has entered the world and what it is doing to our humanities. These meanings aren't spelled out. They are communicated through the visual language of cinema. The characters never speak as though they know an audience is watching them. The reality within the movie operates in total indifference to its fictional nature. Because the Backrooms are inherently fascinating, the slow burn approach isn't boring. The movie takes its time bathing in weird space, giving us time to consciously think about what things mean, and subconsciously become destabilized. Obsession had a few jump scares that made me flinch, but that movie doesn't linger in my soul, though. The final shot of Backrooms does. We are not mere animals, it says. No, the universe has a particularly grisly fate for our kind of intelligence. Backrooms had a blockbuster opening, but the audience response has been mixed, and I fear the movie will suffer a steep drop in its second weekend box office. It did. It had a great premise, just like Obsession, but because it challenged Gen Z with a meditation on its themes, will it be punished? I hope not. Both movies are success stories that give hope to the future of the art form, but only if one should light the way. Obsession points toward a poorer cinematic language. Backrooms is the latest step in a capacious storytelling tradition that reaches back through No Country for Old Men, The Fly, and even Anne Frank. Aw, man, maybe I am getting old. Best, Isaac. And he wrote this on June 4th. What a great letter. That comes from Isaac Daly. What a great letter, Isaac. Thank you. And yes, people, this is why I have the greatest audience on YouTube, because you people write these letters to me and send them in. And it's fantastic. And I can't thank everybody enough for these thoughtful letters. And I didn't expect that. I almost teared up live on camera tonight thinking about the line that I saw for Star Trek The Motion Picture. All because you wrote in or you had something to say. And it's what makes this channel great. At least great for me, because I get to hear from all of you. And I don't know, are there many YouTube channels that read people's letters? I don't know. But I like it when you guys do write in. It's amazing. You know, there's a lot to be said for all the craziness that's going on in the world today. I still find myself being optimistic about the future. So we shall see. But anyway, I'm going to bring this one to an end. I want to thank everybody for writing in. I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this channel via super chats, tips, and memberships. I very much appreciate that. I'm sure we're going to have a member call this coming weekend on Saturday. I want to remind everybody that the ongoing Imagination Connoisseurs movie poster sale, the great uncirculated National Screen Service Corporation movie poster sale, the cache of over 4,000 items I was able to acquire, is ongoing. You can go to the Find Your Niche eBay store, Find Your Niche eBay store, and the sub-store, R&B's Imagination Connoisseurs, is there. We just finished our Bond auctions. This week, original Hitchcock posters go up. There's some really cool stuff, really neat stuff. So Alfred Hitchcock goes up this week, apropos of nothing. Upcoming, we got Disney, we got musicals, we've got the horror and sci-fi stuff is already up, but we'll still be putting up more stuff. 80s classics, 70s classics, 60s classics. So check it out. Some of the posters are in conditions you can't find anywhere else. So the Find Your Niche eBay store, and then the sub-store is R&B's Imagination Connoisseurs. Check it out. The Hitchcock auctions will go up on Friday afternoon, And the other Hitchcock stuff that's not for auction will be up for sale Friday morning. You can go there right now, though. There's a lot of great stuff still. There's some original Star Wars one-sheets available, which I didn't think would stick around as long as they have, but check them out. And on that note, remember, everybody, there is always still fun to be had. I want to thank my moderators. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson and Darth Plato, and I don't know if Lord Toth is here, but everybody else, thank you for being great moderators, and thank you for being the great audience that you are. I very much appreciate it. And again, you know what? Learn as much as you can. Listen to both points of view, and every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say, have a better night.